Lepo pozdravljeni vsi skupaj, lepo, da vas vidim v takem številu, da ste se odzvali vabilom. Danes, kot veste, je z nami Stanislav Grof. On verjetno ne potrebuje neke predstavitve, ampak jo pa zasluži, tako da bom vseeno povedala osnovne stvari o njem, oziroma tiste najbolj pomembne. Upam, da ne bo predolgo, tako da bom vseeno imel čim več časa, da vam preda svoje znanje, ki je zares neskončno, neizčrpno in, kot veste, ga mnogi uvrščajo med najbolj pomembne še živeče ljudi, ki se ukvarjajo s psihologijo in postavljajo ob bok Zigmunda Freuda in Karla Gustava Junga. Zdaj, če preberem čisto nekaj osnovnih podatkov, torej rodil se je na Češkem leta 31, leta 65 je doktoriral iz psihiatrije, potem je delal v Pragi na univerzi v Pragi že takoj na začetku z psihedeličnimi terapijami. Leta 67 je emigriral v ZDA, tam je bil zaposlen kot asistent psihiatrije na univerzi za medicino Johna Hopkinsa, John Hopkins University School of Medicine. Kasneje pa je napredoval do mesta direktorja raziskovalnega centra v Marylandu. Trenutno pa predava na fakulteti za integralne študije in je gostujoči profesor na več univerzah v Ameriki. Med drugim je tudi ustanovnik in dolgoletni predsednik Mednarodne transpersonalne zveze ITA, dobitnik ogromno nagrad, izmed nagrad ne omenim samo nagrado za Zveze za transpersonalno psihologijo in zelo prestižno nagrado Vision 97, ki mu je podelil sam Václav Havel. Zdaj, težko je njegov res obsežen opus strniti v nekaj teh kratkih besed, ampak vendarle bom poskušala res tiste ključne stvari izpostaviti v njegovem delu. Torej, najprej preko zgodnih poskusov psihoaktivnimi snovmi v psihoterapiji je razvil teorijo in prakso, ki se uporablja še danes, to se pravi za psihedelične terapije, kot veste, nov razcvet na področju raziskav psihedeličnih terapij. Torej, preko raziskovanja rojstne travme je prišel do temelja in konstruiral celo teorijo o prenatalni in perinatalni psihologiji. Zdaj, njegov največji doprinos v psihologiji je verjetno njegova razširjena kartografija psihe, ki poleg biografskega nivoja in kolektivnega nezavednega, ki ste jo peljali že Freud in Jung, razširi na prenatalno, perinatalno in celoten spektr transpersonalnih izkustev. Torej, skupaj z Maslovom in Sjutičem je na začetku 70-ih let postavil temelje transpersonalne psihologije, tako imenovane četrte sile v psihologiji. Je avtor preko 150 strokovnih člankov in 22 knjig, ki so prevedene v številne tuje jezike. Tisto, kar še moram omeniti, je, da je skupaj z soprogo Kristino osnoval močno izkustveno metodo duševnega in duhovnega razvoja, holotropic Preddvor, oziroma holotropno delo z dihanjem, ali holotropno dihanje na kratko. Kot veste, žal Kristina ni morala priti zaradi zdravstvenih razlogov, ampak vendarle bo Stan poskušal vsaj malo prikazati tudi njeno delo in njen prispevek v transpersonalni psihologiji. Torej, danes nam bo Stanislav Grof v bistvu predstavil nekako njegov pogled, glede na njegovih 50 let izkušenj in raziskav, njegov pogled na možnost razvoja psihologije in psihoterapije. So Stan, we are really grateful to have you here, and this is a great opportunity that we're really grateful to have you here, and the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is it too loud? No, it's okay. So, good afternoon. Before I start talking, I would like to thank Mojca and Marko and I understand, a group of other people who have been involved in preparing, organizing this meeting. It takes a lot of time and effort, and the work is done behind the scenes, so it's usually not appreciated. So I really appreciate it very much. Thanks for the invitation, and they also have been remarkable hosts. I speak several languages, but Slovenian is not among them. I can guess, approximately what is being done. But we have back in the room, Tina, can you please stand up? Yes. Tina, who knows, not only the art of translation, but she knows transpersonal psychology and has done inner work. So I think you will get really, accurate translation. Those of you who don't speak English. And I think I understood correctly that you mentioned that Christina was not coming,
yeah.
And we can show her art, as she was sort of working on herself. And she also prepared a digital version of her talk, the way she would have done it, and we make it available on the website. So you'll get sort of the pictures and the talk separately. Christina has an immunological autoimmune disease, lupus, and which can be stationary but can also flare up. And the worst development is that it becomes systemic, and it's the heart and kidneys and other organs. So it's a serious disease. And she had a flu, and it flared up this lupus, and so her two physicians said absolutely no travel. And so I'm very, very sorry. I will not come close to the presentation that she would have done. Once when we did a month-long, somebody said, you're a great combination, Stan's intellect and Christina's heart. And we didn't like it. We said, what's wrong with my heart? And what's wrong with Christina's intellect? But it's true. I mean, she is really coming, with incredible warmth. And I'm really sorry that she's not here. So I think what I will be doing today is talking about experiences and observations from something that's more than half a century of interest in consciousness. And what I will be presenting will not be easy to digest for people who have traditional training. And I just would like to say it took me years before I trusted my own observation, because it's so radical. And so this paper came in the last issue of Transpersonal Psychology, in a sort of shorter version, and then I have a 75 pages long version. And it's basically what changes I think have to be done in psychology and psychiatry to accommodate the experiences and the observations from non-ordinary state. And you will see that it's very, very radical. And in the past, people who offer, something too radical usually are not accepted very well. Usually, the first impression is they're crazy or it's bad research. So I decided, because I'm really convinced about what I'm saying, I decided to take a chance, to get all those names. But I want to present it the way I really see it. And if you have difficulties accepting some of those things, just remember that I had real difficulties to accept my own observations. It's very, very difficult for somebody who's a beginning psychiatrist, you see, to come up with something that is not consistent with the worldview of your teachers. And challenging is really difficult. It took me a few years before I started trusting, what I was seeing and what I was experiencing. I had the most materialistic education that you can imagine. I studied medicine and psychiatry in Prague when we had a Marxist regime. We were controlled by the Soviet Union, probably much more than you were. And so this was the purest materialistic doctrine that you can get, and this really turns it all around. So I would like to start this by a somewhat unusual, in a somewhat unusual way, in that I would ask you a few questions. The first question would be, how many of you experience in your own everyday life some powerful non-ordinary states of consciousness, and in what context it was? The possibilities, or some of the possibilities, are intense spiritual practice, or kind of retreat, or very, very powerful methods of these spiritual practices. Some powerful form of experiential psychotherapy. The next one would be sessions with psychedelic substances, shamanic rituals, and participation in some other types of native ceremonies, near-death experiences. Michael Murphy, the co-founder of SLN, wrote the book Psychic Side of Sports, showing that many athletes can have actually mystical experiences during some rigorous sport performance. And the last category would be spontaneous experiences in everyday life. You don't ask for them, you don't do anything to induce them, you might be even fighting them, and they happen anyway. So can I see the hands now for any of the category? Okay, when you can look around, it's probably somewhat self-selected group, but it really happens, anywhere where we come. How many of you experienced the holotropic breathwork already? Okay, quite a few. If not, there is Moitza and Marco, who are both certified, and I hope you brought your flyers.
Yes.
That people know how to find you if they really want to test the kind of things that I will be talking about today. So the reason I'm asking about these non-ordinary states is, first of all, in holotropic breathwork and in psychedelic sessions we use the healing, transformative and evolutionary potential of non-ordinary states of consciousness. And I'll be also talking about the heuristic potential, that's H-E-U-R, which means that if you work with these states, you get a radical new information about the psyche, about consciousness, and even nature of reality that you have to deal with, you have to integrate somehow into your worldview. The other thing is that in psychiatry, psychology, we don't have a category, spiritual experience, mystical experience. People who have these kind of experiences spontaneously, they tend to get a diagnosis of being psychotic, and the diagnosis is given for life. That means just if you have just one episode and it doesn't happen, you would be called psychotic in remission. But just experiencing one episode of these states that we all can experience, because we all carry those elements in our psyche. That's enough for a psychiatric diagnosis that still is to a great extent stigmatizing. It leads to hospitalization frequently, and also a tendency to suppress these experiences. Very different from every other culture. All the ancient cultures, all the pre-industrial cultures would not only hold these experiences in great esteem, but they would actually develop what I call technologies of the sacred. Some safe and powerful methods of inducing them, and they would use it in special rituals for healing. First of all, as a major vehicle of their spiritual and ritual life, they would use it for healing purposes. They would use it for cultivating extrasensory perception, sometimes for practical purposes, finding lost people or lost objects. They use it also as major inspiration for their art. So a lot of the native art is really coming from non-ordinary states. So I've been so far using the term non-ordinary states. British and American psychiatrists actually use a different term, which is altered states of consciousness, which I really dislike because it sounds pejorative to me. It suggests that there's a correct experience of ourselves and of the world, and then in these states is somewhat distorted. They're not authentic. This is not what happens in mystical experiences. You would really have a convincing sense that what you are getting is additional. It actually provides deeper understanding of who we are, a deeper understanding of reality, in some sense in normally inaccessible dimensions of reality. It's almost like looking into the cosmic kitchen, how reality is created. And I will at some point say something about the holographic model, where you sort of understand how it is possible that you get a deeper insight in these states into the nature of reality and your own nature. Now the term non-ordinary is better, but still is too broad. You can have all kinds of non-ordinary states that don't have the healing, transformative, heuristic, evolutionary potential. You can get very drunk and you'll be in a non-ordinary state of consciousness. You can learn a lesson or two, but it's not going to be a revelatory experience. Or after a car accident or various intoxications, degenerative processes in the brain, you can have non-ordinary states of consciousness, epilepsy and so on. Our daughter is married to somebody who's half Native American from the Ojibwe group, and we have these long discussions, very interesting discussions, and she says, Stan, I don't know why you're calling these states non-ordinary. For my people, that's just part of the spectrum that human beings can have. So I think I'm somewhat avant-garde in the academic circles, but for her it's a very sort of limited presentation that I do. So these 56 years that I've been working with non-ordinary states, I've been interested in a subgroup that has all these properties that I mentioned: healing, transformative, evolutionary, heuristic. And I was astounded that psychiatry does not have a term for them. All these states are altered, and they're all seen as one or another form of pathology. So since I didn't find a name, I decided to coin one myself and started calling them holotropic. So the term holotropic is a neologism. It's a composite word from Latin. Holos means whole, and trepein means moving in the direction of something. You will probably know the term heliotropism. Helios is the sun, and then trepein again, moving in the direction of something. And it's the property of the flower, of the plant, to always follow the sun. For example, if you take a picnic on the field of sunflowers and you're there for 3 hours, they will sort of all do something like this. Okay? So it's moving toward wholeness, it's the literal translation. And if you say this to somebody from the industrial civilization, and they will say, what do you mean? Moving toward wholeness. Aren't we already whole the way we experience ourselves in everyday life? And the answer would be no. We identify just a very small fragment of who we are and our experiential potential. And I use frequently the Hindu way of presenting it. in the Hindu religion, spirituality, you would hear we are not nama rupa, we are not name and shape, we are not body ego. Our deepest identity is with a spark of cosmic creative energy that we carry in our innermost being. And it's called in Sanskrit Atman. And this is not a belief of the Hindus or some kind of a fantasy. This can be pragmatically proven if you follow certain practices, certain yogas. This is something that is available, that experience is available to all of us. Unfortunately, in the Western civilization, industrial civilization, we have rejected all holotropic states. This happened in the scientific and industrial revolution, where there were discoveries that were turned into technological improvements, and the reason started sort of changing the world, and there was a tremendous admiration for reason. You probably know that some of the French churches were not being used anymore for divine service. Notre Dame was called the Temple of Reason, and there came with kind of a hubris with it, that everything that's not rational is irrational. It's kind of an embarrassing leftover from the childhood of humanity, and it was rejected. And actually, some of the means or contexts of creating were even outlawed. People really cannot do it, unless the native cultures that were actively seeking these states, and we pathologized these states. So it is something that can be pragmatically proven, but unfortunately, most people have to experience it to believe it. Otherwise, it's like discussing sexual orgasm with pre-adolescents. If you didn't have the experience, you might wonder, how, can there be an experience that people would ruin their lives for? And the same with the mystical, people give up. They don't ruin their lives, but they give up their everyday life for spiritual pursuit. One day, when they get a sense what it is about. So another way of saying that would be use Teilhard de Chardin, who was a Jesuit philosopher and paleontologist in France, and he said, we are not human beings having spiritual experiences. We are spiritual beings having human experiences. And Alan Watts, the British-American philosopher and writer, said a number of times, we are not skin-encapsulated egos. We are not what we are experiencing ourselves in our everyday life. Now, what would be the context in which we see holotropic experiences? The first one would be the initiatory crisis that begins, the career of many shamans. This is very open to shamanism. Sometimes it's being weakened by some physical disease, but in many instances it's simply a spontaneous visionary experience that takes you into the underworld. You have the experience of being attacked by some evil forces. You experience great suffering, even torture. You might have the feeling that you're dismembered, that you die. And then there is the experience of a kind of a magical journey into the supernal realm, into the solar realm. This could be the experience of identification with a solar bird, like an eagle, a thunderbird, a falcon, a condor in South America. or you might have the experience of being carried by this bird. And in some other cultures, it's climbing the world tree or climbing the rainbow. There's sort of different archetypal expressions for that. But basically, it is an experience of death and rebirth, and also spiritual opening. The shamans experience deep connection with forces of nature, with animals, both real animals and archetypal animals, which they call power animals or animal spirits. And what is very interesting is that they typically heal themselves from emotional, psychosomatic, and sometimes physical diseases. So the anthropologists call them wounded healers. People who heal themselves before they start healing others. And not only that, they will also get a kind of crash course in healing. They learn how to heal. And if they integrate the experience well, they are then sort of accepted as healers in their tribe. Now it's really the grounding is important, and it's not true what we hear from our psychiatrists and from anthropologists that those shamans are crazy. The discussion, are they schizophrenics, are they borderline, are they hysterical psychotics because they can be so theatrical. None of it is true, and we had a lot of contact with shamans. They can handle reality just as well or better than the rest of the tribe, but they have something additional. So if they integrate the experience well, they become leaders, they become healers, seers. They are very frequently artists, even good politicians. They usually know all the gossip. They know what's happening in the tribe. So they are not somewhere in a Z-band, as we call it. So going sort of out into a wild experience doesn't make you a shaman. I mean, those native cultures, they are not idiots. The idea that if there's experiences that they don't understand, that they sort of see it as sacred. I mean, they can tell who is a shaman and who is just crazy or sick. So you have to really have certain properties to be accepted as shaman. And then the shamans use these holotropic experiences when they are working with others. Either they enter themselves in an ordinary state, or they induce it in their clients, or both the shamans and the clients would be in a holotropic state. The second category, when you see these holotropic states, are so-called rites of passage. This is a term that comes from a Dutch anthropologist, Arnold van Gennep, I think we have the name there, the G-E-N-N-E-P, who studied many native cultures, and he found out that practically all of them developed very powerful rituals that they enact at a time of important biological or social transitions. For example, birth, circumcision, puberty, marriage, menopause, and of course dying, or sometimes as initiation of warriors, or in movement to another territory. This is a time for powerful holotropic states, and they would define a certain area as sacred, and this is where they invite what could be called a horizontal and vertical dimension. We live in a horizontal dimension, and they bring sort of the other sort of normally invisible realities, particularly the archetypal domain. This is a term that was used very much by Carl Gustav Jung, and it's closely related to the Platonic idea of the forms or the ideas, like another dimension of reality that forms and informs what is happening here. The archetypes could be seen from three different perspectives. They can be seen as mythological principles, archai, deities, Aphrodite and Hades and Persephone and so on. They can be seen as philosophical principles, which means Platonic forms or ideas, or another perspective is to see them as psychological principles, which was Jung's approach. So these are rituals in which they somehow have the experience of the world, of the, we would say archetypes, they would say deities. And this is an important vehicle in their ritual and spiritual life. If you study them, what happens in these rituals that people experience psycho-spiritual death and rebirth, very much like what I described already for shamans. In native cultures, the shamans have higher status than the initiates, although they have similar experiences. The idea is the shaman is chosen for a special function, whereas this is sort of used by humans, the rituals. So I will just give it an example. The puberty rites, which exist really in all native cultures. What happens there? If you are an adolescent boy or girl, there would be separation from the tribe. You would be put through powerful procedure involving holotropic states, and you experience death and rebirth, and then experiential return into the tribe, and now you become adults. Nobody in the tribe will ever dare to treat you as a boy or a girl now. You are an adult, you have been through this. Very different from our culture, where you can be 60 years old and you go to your parents and you're still, your parents' little girl or boy, and they think that they can make decisions for you or approve or not approve what you are doing in your life. Whereas in these native cultures, there's a very clear separation. And from that perspective, we are really a culture of adolescence. I mean, if you see kind of Hollywood movies, that they're catering basically to adolescent audiences. All these sort of explosions and destruction and so on. Not particularly interesting for somebody who has really some mature judgment about these things. So I was part of a group of about 18 people invited by Margaret Mead, who was an anthropologist, and her idea was that the fact that we lost meaningful rites of passage actually contributes to the problems that we have with adolescents, the drugs, the promiscuity, the criminality, and so on. They don't have socially sanctioned context in which they would confront their destructive and self-destructive drives. And we discussed things like, is it possible to create these rituals, or does it have to come out of the history of the tribe? And since psychedelics were kind of out of question in the current situation, we discussed actually the holotropic breath work. We discussed things like fire walking, what's called in the United States ropes courses. Okay, you put sort of different things way up there, and people have to cross the these ropes supporting each other, and they have to jump and catch something. And it's used for team building very much in the United States, because if two people have to cross two of these ropes, they have to support each other, and then they have harness, which is then held by the rest of the team. So we really have a reason, to hang together and cooperate, unlike in everyday life. So the third major category is something that was described for the ancient mysteries of death and rebirth. These are based on mythologies that are about gods and demigods and some legendary heroes who experienced death in one way or another. They were killed and dismembered and put back together, or they visited the underworld and returned, like Inanna, the Sumerian goddess, or Odysseus, and so on. And in all these places, there were ritual events, ceremonies, in which people experience again death and rebirth, and this was seen as identification with the corresponding deity. So there were the Sumerian mysteries of Inanna and Dumuzi, there were the Egyptian mysteries of Isis and Osiris, there were the Bacchanalia, which were based on the myth of Dionysus being dismembered and resurrected by Pallas Athene. The ceremonies of Attis, Adonis, the Corybants, Mithra. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl in the Aztec tradition, the hero twins in the Mayan tradition, and so on. I just have to check, I think I'm going too fast. Am I giving you a hard time? Is that okay? Okay. I forget that I'm cooperating. I will just mention specific example, which were the Eleusinian or Eleusinian mysteries conducted in Eleusis, which is about 16 miles from Athens. They were conducted for almost 2,000 years, every 5 years. Now, you know that they had to offer something pretty impressive to keep the attention of the ancient world. The list of the people who were initiates in these mysteries reads like, we have in America, who is who are the important people. So you have Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, Emperor Mark Antonius, Pindaros, just a number of these personalities that were initiates of these mysteries. Now, when Christine and I visited Eleusis, we had a guide, and there are the ruins of the Telestrion where they were conducting these mysteries. And I asked at one point how many people were doing it at one time. And she said, well, about 3,000. Now, if in a relatively small world, you see, 3,000 people would have powerful experiences, that has to have some influence of culture. There's a very interesting book, Road to Eleusis, by Albert Hoffman, who discovered LSD, and Gordon Wasson, who brought the Mazatec magic mushrooms and gave them to Albert Hoffman for chemical analysis, and a Greek scholar called Karl Rack, and they have shown that the key to these experiences and to these mysteries was a sacred beverage which was called Kykeon, Kykeon, and they showed that this was a preparation from ergot, very similar to LSD. So this is the best kept secret. We say the Greeks were really very talented people. They had some interesting ideas. Well, if 3,000 people in the area had these powerful psychedelic experiences every 5 years, there would be some interesting idea coming from this kind of population. So today, when I think about Plato, I don't see him pacing in the academy and saying, well, let me see how the world works. So we don't have just this level. There's also this other level. There are all these forms. Those are all experiences that people can have today in these holotropic experiences of various kinds, whether it's breathwork or powerful spiritual practice. Michael Harner just published a book called The Cave and Cosmos, Cave and Cosmos, I think it's called, showing just how powerful the just drumming, shamanic drumming can be, and he described a whole range of experiences that can take you into these kinds of dimensions. And then there were also powerful technologies for inducing holotropic states developed in the context of the great religions of the world. So there would be different schools of yoga, different forms of Buddhism, from Theravada to Zen and Vajrayana. There would be Taoistic methods of inducing these states, Kabbalistic exercises, Sufi technologies, using singing and whirling and breathing exercises. In the Christian tradition, it was Jesus' prayer, hesychasm, very, very powerful method. What the desert fathers were doing, like Saint Anthony and so on, and then the exercises of Ignatius of Loyola in the Christian tradition. Okay. Okay. Now the revelation of the deep sort of identity of the individual with the divine is really the secret that you find at the core, the mystical core of major spiritual, religious traditions. So I have just several examples. We already mentioned Hinduism. We are Atman, Brahman, Tattvam Asi. I didn't say that. In the Upanishads, there is the question, who are you, who are we? And the answer is, in Sanskrit, thou art that, which would be, sounds very prosaic, you are it, you're that. It's written with the capital letter to put it in perspective. But what it basically means, your nature is divine. We are all divine beings, and it's not, that me, Stan Grof, I am God, I'm a divine being. You guys are just ordinary folks, and this is a kind of a psychotic conclusion made from mystical experiences that are not finished and are not integrated. When the ego doesn't surrender and people experience themselves for their own divinity and they attach it to their everyday identity. So if this experience goes 360 degrees, then you're really grounded. It's, I am divine, but so is everybody else. Some people have that experience before me, some other people can have it tomorrow or 2 weeks from now. So it's not a big deal. So I'm just going to go and wash dishes. It's just the divine incarnate washing dishes. Nothing sort of changes in the world except your understanding. You have some really deeper understanding of reality and certain dimensions that are not normally available to us in the ordinary state of consciousness. But in these sacred scriptures, in the Vedas, Upanishads, they didn't make it up. Those are not fantasies. I mean, those are really experiences that we all can have. Spent a lot of time with Swami Muktananda in Siddha Yoga. He used to say, God dwells in you as you. And he's thinking, the Guru, you, and God are one. And we have Buddhist scriptures, look inside, you are the Buddha. You have Confucian tradition, heaven, earth, and humans are the same. Jesus, in the mystical tradition, says, Father, you and I are one. It also says, the divine kingdom doesn't come by expectation. The divine kingdom is here, but people don't see it. In other words, something has to change in your perception. It's not like that 2,000 years ago, God incarnated, and now we are all, waiting for the second coming. Christina, in her book, The Thirst for Wholeness, about mysticism and alcoholism, the spiritual path, describes how, as a girl in Honolulu, she went to the Episcopalian church and they let them sing, "Oh Lord, we are miserable sinners who don't deserve the but crumbs from your table. We are sick to our core, there is no help to us." You know, Brother David says, gospel means good spell, good news. So if I say you are not ordinary human being, you are divine, that's good news. If I say you're a miserable sinner who doesn't deserve the crumbs from God's table, that's not particularly encouraging message. It's actually vaccination against spiritual experience, because ultimately in the sort of, from the mystical perspective, the only place where you can really find God is inside, or maybe in nature. But you don't need hierarchies. Mystics don't need hierarchies. This is why they didn't have a good standing in the church, you know. During the Inquisition, a lot of people who had direct experiences would end up in the autos da fe. We have another one, which is Saint Gregorius Palamas, the kingdom of heaven, nay, which is like no. The king of heaven is within us. Then you have Kabbalist Abulafia, he and we are one. Mohammed said, whoever knows himself, should have also said herself, knows his Lord. And the Sufi Al-Arj said, I am God, and the absolute reality, the true reality, and he got burned by the members of the organized religion. These are just, you know, my own areas of interest. I was introduced into this realm of holotropic experiences when, as a beginning psychiatrist, I volunteered for an experiment with LSD, which was sent to us from Sandoz. They said this is a very interesting drug that was discovered practically by accident by Dr. Hoffman, an expert in ergot alkaloids, who somehow intoxicated himself as he was synthesizing LSD. Actually, the story is much more interesting than he says. I don't have time to go into it. He was, lysergic acid is something that exists in these ergot alkaloids. Lysergic is from lysis, which means dissolving, and ergot, so something that you get from dissolving ergot. And he was creating various derivatives of the lysergic acid, and LSD was the 25th. So this is why it's called LSD 25. It was synthesized in 38, years 38. He sent it to the pharmacologist and it came back not a particularly interesting substance. They tried it on rats and rabbits, and it's not particularly interesting what you can observe. And so he continued making more of these derivatives, but those of us who knew him heard frequently, he said somehow as he was doing this work, he couldn't get rid somehow of the idea that they must have overlooked something in this one particular substance. Very, very strange. It became so strong that 5 years later he decided to synthesize another sample and send it back for more careful analysis. And of course, no matter how careful you are, how meticulous, you don't experience it, or you cannot sort of see it in animals. And he just happened to intoxicate himself, and this is how he discovered that. So he used to say, I did not discover LSD, LSD called me. So like this substance to say, wait a minute, you should really take a closer look. Okay, so I was at that time getting sort of disenchanted with psychoanalysis. This was the reason why I went to study medicine, and I started realizing that it's a lot of hours, a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money, because money is very important there. And I originally wanted to go into animated movies, and so I started having the feeling this is a wrong choice of career. I should have sort of stayed with the animated movies. And then suddenly there was this opportunity. It came from Sandoz with the letter. It's a very interesting drug. Maybe this could be used as experimental psychosis. You could sort of give it to quote-unquote normal people. You do some tests before, during, and after, and you find out what's happening biologically when the psyche of people is so profoundly influenced. And then there was a second suggestion, the second tip, which kind of became my destiny or karma. It says, well, maybe this could be used as a kind of unconventional educational tool, which means psychiatrists, psychologists, and students, nurses could have this experience of a realm in which the patients, some of their patients seem to live. And if you have that experience, you probably will understand them better, you'll be able to communicate with them more effectively, and hopefully have more success in treating them, which was kind of sorely needed in psychiatry at that time. We were using electroshocks, cardiazole shocks, insulin coma, dunking people in cold water, a pretty medieval kind of approach. And suddenly there was this possibility of being more successful. In addition, there was this the power of LSD, which was micrograms. Millions of a gram can change mental functioning for 6 to 8 hours. So our initial excitement was about the possibility that the human body under certain circumstances can produce something like that, and that really what we call mental diseases would not be mental diseases, they would be aberrations of body chemistry, and if we can identify it, we can find some remedy. This would be a holy grail of psychiatry, test tube solution for schizophrenia. So this was our initial excitement about LSD. I volunteered in this experiment, and my preceptor was very interested in electroencephalography, and in particular in something called driving the brainwaves, which is exposing people to stroboscopic light and finding out if you can influence the brainwaves in the suboccipital area. So those of us who wanted to have this experience had to agree that we would have not only EEG before, during, and after, but we get our brainwaves driven in the middle of that experiment. So what happened practically between the 3rd and 4th hour, when my experience was culminating, this research assistant came and said, "It's time to drive the brainwaves." She took me in another room, I lay down, and she put the electrodes on my head, and then brought this gigantic strobe, put it above my head and turned it on, and in the next moment there was light like I had never seen. I couldn't even imagine existed. Like when the mystics talk about millions of suns. Initially I thought it was like what it must have been in Hiroshima when the bomb exploded. Today I think it was more like the Dharmakaya from the Tibetan Book of the Dead that you see at the moment of your death. But my consciousness was just catapulted out of my body. I lost the research assistant, I lost the clinic, I lost Prague, I lost the planet. And I have the feeling that I ceased to exist as my everyday self. I was just extinguished, but I somehow, by becoming nothing, I had the feeling I became everything. I became sort of the totality of existence. And then coming down, I was in the astronomical universe where there were sort of things happening for which at the time I didn't have a name, but later I read about the Big Bang and the black holes, white holes, wormholes. I mean, it was something in that category. And then she turned it off, and my consciousness was shrinking again. I found, the planet, I found Prague, I found my body, But for a while I had problems trying to align my consciousness with my body. I was kind of just circling around, trying to figure out how those two get together. And it was just absolutely clear to me that consciousness is not something that we can cook in our brain, that this is a cosmic phenomenon, and that the brain somehow mediates consciousness but does not really produce it. And I will sort of return to this later. So I sort of landed in a really beautiful place, and I thought, I'm already stuck with psychiatry, and if you're a psychiatrist, this is by far the most interesting thing you can do, is to study these states, these holotropic states. So if you look at these 50 years, I've really done very little that would not be related in one or another way to these holotropic states. So these are the different situations. I had personal experiences with different psychedelic substances, also various non-drug methods of self-exploration. Moitsaga spoke about the holotropic Preddvor. It's one of those methods. I was part of a program first in Prague at the Psychiatric Research Institute, and then in Maryland at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center, and I ended up leading the last surviving project of clinical examination of the psychedelic substances in Baltimore. We had a big sensory deprivation tank that John Lilly built, where you could be underwater with a kind of a mask in darkness, same temperature of water as your body, no sounds, and people also having powerful experiences. Then Christina and I developed the holotropic Preddvor with us, and we did it first in workshops, and now we have training where probably about 1,300 people all over the world have been certified as facilitators, and many other people are in the training, and many people whom we train conducting their own workshops. And then over the years we did a lot of work with people where the holotropic experiences happen spontaneously. And we found out that instead of suppressing them by tranquilizers, you actually support the experiences as if these were holotropic experiences in the breathwork or in psychedelic sessions. And you find out that if they're properly understood and supported, they are healing and transformative. So we coined the term spiritual emergencies. It's a play on words, because the Latin emergere means to emerge. But if a situation emerges suddenly and surprises you, it's called emergency. They go to an emergency room. This is an emergency. So that kind of two aspects, two meanings of that word, emergere, sort of emerge to another level, and a crisis. It is a crisis in people's life. If it's intense, they cannot handle ordinary situations. We frequently point to the Chinese sign for crisis, which consists of two other pictograms. One is the danger, the other one is opportunity. So these situations are problems in people's lives, but they are also opportunity to do some really powerful healing and transformative work if you know what is happening there. And then there are other situations. I spent a lot of time with shamans, South American, Mexican, North American, participated in native rituals with psychedelics like peyote, mushrooms, ayahuasca, kava, and without, rituals there were no plants involved, just sort of non-drug or non-pharmacological means. I was very interested in psychics and parapsychologists, also near-death survivors and thanatologists. We had a large study where we used psychedelics to induce mystical experiences, and we were studying if this will take away the fear of death of terminal cancer patients, and if you can transform actually the experience of dying. If you are interested, this was described in my book, The Ultimate Journey. About 1/3 of it is description of this study, and the rest of it is what we learned about death, both dying, biological dying, and then the psychospiritual death rebirth process that I described in those different contexts, in rites of passage, in shamans, in the mysteries, and so on. Then we worked with some people who had UFO experiences and experience of being abducted by UFOs. It's a really fascinating phenomenon. It's not possible just to dismiss it and say these people are psychotic and we put them on tranquilizers. John Mack, who was a psychoanalyst, who got killed in London by crossing the street by a drunken driver, and he was a psychoanalyst at Harvard, and he did also our training, and he became fascinated by these UFO experiences and studied over 200 of them, wrote books, The Passport to the Universe, Abductions, and he had a lawsuit going with Harvard because they wanted to take away his tenure, because he just didn't simply call these people psychotic and put them on tranquilizers. He was sort of talking with them and exploring these experiences. He wrote books that are really very interesting. It's a phenomenon that we would call now anomalous, things that we cannot explain by our current theories. And then contact with a lot of spiritual teachers. I mentioned Muktananda, Siddha Yoga. We did 7-day retreats, about 30 of them, with Jack Cornfield, who is a great Vipassana Buddhist teacher, where we combine Vipassana meditation with the holotropic breathwork. We met Tibetan masters and Zen Buddhists and people like Brother David Steiner-Rast or Father Beat Griffith, who are like mystics from the Benedictine order, and we were very interested what they do if these methods that they are using are too successful, if they open up people and really powerful spiritual experiences come, if they have ways of supporting that and helping people to complete those experiences and ground them. So this was my experience. As you can see, the common denominator always holotropic state. This became my passion, my vocation, my profession. Okay, now if you work with these states, it really cannot be explained by the current sort of concept that we have in psychology, psychiatry, but even in materialistic science. What is here mentioned is 1962, a very, very influential philosopher, Thomas Kuhn, wrote a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. After 15 years of studying the history of science, and he found out that the history of science is not a linear process where we get more and more information and we formulate more and more accurate hypotheses about them. He found out that the history of science breaks into very distinct periods and that they have certain dynamics that you can even predict. And like the cornerstone of this theory that he had is the concept of paradigm. Now the paradigm can be defined as a constellation of basic metaphysical assumptions, of beliefs, of values and techniques that the entire academic community shares. They all agree that this is the way of seeing the world. Now when the scientific community is influenced by a paradigm, then they do something that Thomas Kuhn called normal science, which is basically problem solving within a certain context. It's like playing chess. I mean, you cannot stay the pawn suddenly and use the pawn as a king. You have to play it by rules. You know what is possible, what isn't possible, and then you have problems and you solve them. But then what happened again and again in the history of science, that observations were made that the current paradigm could not explain. And that's usually initially dismissed. This couldn't have happened, this is bad science, or mentioned, the person is crazy. But then when they keep coming, and coming from different directions, it creates a crisis. And that Kuhn called abnormal science. And at that point, concepts and theories emerge that are trying to explain these observations that the old paradigm cannot explain. And then after a while, one of those suggestions is accepted and becomes the new paradigm that governs the next period until some more challenges come. So I have here a few examples of that. The major one was the replacement of the geocentric system of Ptolemy by the heliocentric system of Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler. Kepler finally sort of really gave the final proof for that. Another major paradigm shift was happened in chemistry, where Becher's concept of the phlogiston, which was the kind of a royal substance that was combining with other substances, and this is how you could explain the variety of chemical substances. This was replaced by the atomic thinking by Lavoisier and Dalton. And the third example that I have here is the real conceptual cataclysm that happened in the first 3 decades in physics, when the physicists had to move from Newtonian physics first to theories of relativity and then to quantum theory that even Einstein could not accept, although he was the one who inspired it. So there's another thing that happens in sorry, I'm going back, yeah?
No, it's okay.
Let me see, I'm pushing the wrong button, sorry. Okay, this is another thing that the scientific community does very frequently, that the current paradigm would be considered to be an accurate and definitive description of reality. This is called confusing the map and the territory. Gregory Bateson Korzybski from Poland first described this phenomenon, and Gregory Bateson used to say, if scientists make that kind of error, it might happen to them that they come to the restaurant and they eat the menu instead of the dinner. The map could be better or not so good, but it's not the territory. It's not the reality. It's our best way of using our observations and sort of make some kind of statement about it. There was Lord Kelvin that at the turn of the centuries, from the 19th to the 20th, gave a talk in a British scientific society, and he said, physics is a finished discipline, no more changes, just more accurate measurements. This was 5 years before Einstein wrote the 3 papers that just, turned physics around. So what we have now is an enormous number of what we call anomalies or anomalous phenomena, which is things that current science cannot explain. Just major example, it's what happens to people in near-death situations. The consciousness goes out of the body, and they might be in a state of clinical death, cardiac death, or even have a flat EEG, and consciousness is watching it all from the ceiling, and then either gets interested and floats down to check it a little better, or decides to go for a little trip and goes to other rooms of that same building, or experience something 200 miles away. And if you have an open-minded scientist who goes and checks it, he doesn't say, these kinds of things cannot happen. Go and check it. They find out that they can confirm it. They get sort of consensual validation from people who have the gift of vision. So usually there's a tendency to explain these anomalous phenomena as pathologies, but actually the truth is that they have mostly positive effect, if they are properly understood, properly integrated. For example, near-death experiences can have really very positive transforming effect on people. Maslow's peak experiences have the same kind of an effect. Even the abduction phenomena can have positive effects, and certainly spiritual emergencies where people have a lot of sort of non-ordinary type of experiences, if they are properly supported. They can be very healing, they can be transformative. So how do you solve the problem phenomena? Basically, if there are a lot of them, you just have to change the paradigm. I have here Bridgman's definition. Anomalous phenomena is what you have left when you apply a bad theory, one that is based on false conceptual framework or false metaphysical assumptions and premises. I have William James here, famous American psychologist, who said, no scientific worldview can aspire to be complete without taking into consideration anomalous phenomena. So it's really, if you have too many anomalies, that's time to change the paradigm. How are we doing with time? And also, Tina, do you need a break?
We can make a short break, 15 minutes?
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
Yeah, 15 minutes?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we'll continue. So this, what we have here, is implications of the work with holotropic states for psychiatry, psychology, and psychotherapy. And some of these are the revisions that would have to be made. Some of them are simply areas where we would have better understanding if we introduce these new concepts. So the first would be, we would have to vastly expand the model of the psyche. What we use now in psychology and psychiatry is limited to postnatal biography. Freud said the newborn is a tabula rasa, an erased tablet, washed blackboard. There's nothing of interest for psychologists and psychiatrists that precede birth, including birth itself. Although Freud had a very short period in his life when he thought maybe birth is a template for all future anxieties, but then he sort of didn't develop it any further. And his follower Otto Rank then wrote the book on the birth trauma. So when we use holotropic states, we'll find out that the experiences that people have don't remain in this very narrowly defined territory of postnatal biography, what happened in infancy, in childhood, in later life. But they will first move into what I call perinatal area. You find out that there is a record of all the experiences that you had as you were passing through the stages of birth. And I talk about it as perinatal, basic perinatal matrices. And we will talk about it later. The experiences that you have when you are living the individual stages of the birth process. And then there is another very vast area which we now call transpersonal, when you can have experiences of experiential identification with other people, you can experience group consciousness, you can experience identification with various representatives of other species, even plants. Then another category of transpersonal experiences takes you back into history, not just your history, but human history. You can experience things from other centuries, sometimes with a feeling of what we call déjà vu, déjà vécu, which means something's happening to you and you say, this is not new. I have already seen this, I have already experienced this, and then we are in the realm of karma and reincarnation. You understand why so many cultures and so many historical periods had shared this concept that there were some other lives that preceded this one, and that there's some kind of a connection between them. This is I don't want to call it belief, because it's not, belief is some kind of ungrounded conviction. This is simply conclusion from a category of powerful experiences. So this was shared by many different groups, by many different cultures, all Indian religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Parsi religion. You find it in North Americans, natives, you find it in South American Indians, you find it among the Kahunas in Polynesia, you find it in medieval Judaism, in Kabbalah, you just find it in a number of different contexts. And then these experiences can also take you into the world of mythology. And as Jung has shown, you can have experiences from mythologies that you don't know anything about intellectually. This is when he came with the idea of collective unconscious. And the collective unconscious can be historical, which takes you into other centuries, or it can be archetypal, when you have experiences of deities and realms described by various mythologies. So in principle, you can experience anything that you in everyday life experience as an object, you can in holotropic states experience as a subjective experience. You can become a sequoia tree, you can become a whale. I had an experience of being a carnivorous plant in the process of digesting a fly. Now the second experience that I couldn't conjure up in my everyday consciousness. I mean, this was so beyond my ordinary imagination. Okay, now the second category is if you work on some emotional or psychosomatic problems, or even interpersonal problems. According to traditional psychology, psychiatry, the roots should be, if they are not organic, the roots should be in infancy and childhood. There's a whole scheme that came from classical psychoanalysis, where you associate various disorders with various periods of your postnatal life. Oral problems like alcoholism, addiction, even depression would be, suicide would be seen as oral problems. With suicide, you kill introjected breast of your mother, for example. The obsessive-compulsive neurosis would be linked to toilet training, and then in classical psychoanalysis, hysteria, anxiety hysteria, which is phobias, and conversion hysteria, which is the anything from hysterical anesthesia, hysterical paralysis, hysterical aphonia, not being able to talk, hysterical blindness, hysterical attack, hysterical pregnancy. Those all would be seen as related to the period around 4 years of age, when you're dealing with the Oedipus Electra problems and you experience some kind of sexual trauma. Now, if you are working with holotropic states, then you always find some meaningful connection to your early life. It's not that it's not true, what you hear about in psychoanalysis and all the different schools derived from Freudian analysis, but it's just not all there is. It describes fairly accurately a superficial layer of the dynamics which is involved in those kinds of problems. If you have a more powerful method like psychedelics or the breathwork, you'll find out that the roots go much deeper. You find additional connections to one of the perinatal matrices, and then beyond this or beneath it, you can have a reincarnation experience, or you can have some encounter with archetypal dynamics. You can even have what's called phylogenetic, in other words, some experiences from the life of your animal ancestors. So this looks like very bad news. We thought all we have to do is to clean our memories from childhood, from infancy. Now we see the playground is much, much bigger. The good news is that you discover new, powerful therapeutic mechanisms, healing mechanisms on the perinatal level and the transpersonal level. For example, reliving birth can alleviate a number of various problems, beginning with claustrophobia, where it's obvious the second stage of birth underlies one form of depression, which is called inhibited depression. There is a source of much aggression on the perinatal level. Psychosomatic disorders like the migraine headache or asthma, they are rooted in the perinatal level, and then have even deeper roots to past life experiences and other types of experiences. And there are healing mechanisms associated with all these different experiences. Then you have, for example, experience of cosmic unity, experience of oneness with other people, with nature, with the universe, which is extremely powerful healing mechanism. Unfortunately, it will be diagnosed as a psychotic experience of cosmic unity. There's no category in DSM that would, within a DSM that would sort of talk about it as something that can be observed in people, mystical experience, spiritual experience. Okay, the next very important category is strategy of psychotherapy and self-healing intelligence of the psyche. So we have many schools of psychotherapy, and each school has a different opinion about what are the main motivating forces in the psyche. Is it sex? Is it feelings of inferiority that we overcompensate? Is it that society doesn't allow us to have full sexual life the way Wilhelm Reich saw it? You know, each school has its own perspective on that. Each school will give you a different story, why the symptoms emerge, what they mean, and also gives you a different strategy, how to work with your clients. So most of us are not even concerned about it. You know, sure, we have so many schools, everybody says something different, like behaviorists will give you one approach, Freudian analyst, and then you go to Frommenian, Sullivanian, many different schools. And the problem is that you cannot really show any kind of difference in therapeutic results with these different schools. There's studies, like the last one I read was Jerome Frank from Johns Hopkins University and his daughter Julia, showing that there is really no statistical difference between the results of these different schools. If it were so, you know, that it would be about rational understanding of the psyche, and then deriving from it some kind of method of intervention in clients, and bring it into your interpretations. Interpretation is very, very important. There should be the results should be distributed on a Gaussian curve. There would be one school that has the best understanding of the psyche, it gives the best interpretations, and this should be where you get the best results, and the other schools will be distributed on these descending branches, depending on how much they deviate from really correct understanding. And what seems the difference is inside of the schools. There are sort of better therapists and not so good therapists inside of the schools, but you cannot say that Reenchantment therapy is superior to Freudian or Stalininian or Frommian and so on. It seems that something that's really effective in psychotherapy is something that you cannot describe scientifically, something like the human encounter, the quality of the human encounter between the therapist and the client. The feeling of the client that they are unconditionally accepted by another human being, typically for the first time in their life, because they didn't get it in their families. And they mentioned sort of, Frank and his daughter mentioned, some of these kinds of elements. Another possibility is that if you have a therapist, you see you have much more tolerance for symptoms, because now you want to collect the information, you watch your dreams, and sort of you really pay attention to what is happening, rather than just panicking about it. And you give a chance to some self-healing mechanisms that start sort of moving inside of the psyche. I frequently give an example from my own analysis. I was in analysis for 7 years, 3 times a week, a lot of money, a lot of a lot of energy, a lot of time. And my analyst was probably in his late 70s or late 60s, early 70s, and there were about 7 of psychiatrists of the same age in analysis with him, and we all observed that sometimes he dozes off, sort of takes a little nap, and then you have to do something, try to bring him back into the process. And we all knew it, and we were making jokes about it, and we also had the possibility of asking questions in the little seminars that we had with him. And one of us asked, what happens if one just falls asleep in the session? If I free associate, does the therapy continue? Is the process interrupted? Should I get refunded? Because money is so important. Now, he didn't say this kind of thing doesn't happen. He knew we knew, so he had to give some explanation. So he said, yeah, it can happen. Sometimes you're tired, you're recovering from a flu, you didn't sleep well. Yeah, it can happen. But, he says, if you're in this business a long time, you fall asleep only when that stuff that's coming up is irrelevant. When something really important comes, you wake up and you're right there. And he was from Russia, he immigrated from Russia, and he was a great admirer of Ivan Petrovich Pavlov, the one who got the Nobel Prize for the conditioned reflexes. And Pavlov talks about inhibition in the cortex, and that there could be a waking point. For example, in hypnosis, or his favorite example is the mother who can sleep through heavy noises, but if her own child starts moaning, she wakes up and she's right there. He says, just like Pavlov's mother, when something really important, something relevant is happening, you just wake up. Well, relevant according to whom? Had I had an Adlerian therapist or a Frommian or a Stalininian, they would have fallen asleep and wake up at different parts of my narrative. So what is the alternative to this? It's also, when we choose as a psychiatrist, or as a medical doctor or a psychologist, we choose the school, our choice says much more about us than about the school. Like for me it was Freud, this is where I'm going to get my training, here he's got it. Well, there's really no proof that one school or another is more effective statistically. Now, what is the alternative that we learned from holotropic states is that if you are in a holotropic state, it activates like an inner radar, you see, that finds what is relevant because it has a strong emotional charge, but it's not my conclusion on the basis of what my school thinks. It is an inner process. So something that has a strong emotional charge and is in the right position to the threshold of consciousness will automatically be selected for processing. Something else could have very strong charge and will have to wait 2 sessions, 3 sessions or more, because it's not in the right connection to the unconscious. And then you also activate sort of internal self-healing intelligence that will guide the process. It will decide what comes first, what comes late. And we simply have to support the process. We are not sort of running it. We are not doers. We are co-adventurers, as Jung called. Jung was quite close to this concept. He was using in later years of his life something called active imagination. And instead of analyzing dreams from memory, the way Freud did, sometimes, dreams that were not weeks or months, but years old. Somebody told him a dream that they had 20 years ago, and Freud would analyze it. Jung wanted to see the material emerging in statu nascendi, as it was coming up. So this happens in holotropic states. If you are there, you see the material coming sequentially out of the unconscious, and then you just simply support that. The healing process already is there, very much like many people compare it to midwifery. There's already the process for delivering the baby there, and a good obstetrician just supports the process. And if something gets stuck, you just do a little something so that it gets going again. A good obstetrician doesn't say, oh, let me see here, this is the way we take out the baby, and goes there, with the forceps and wrestles the baby out. So this is very, very much what happens in these holotropic states. So you provide a supportive environment, like in holotropic breathwork, for example. People work with each other. Everybody has a partner, and then they switch in the next session. The support system is very important. We have trained facilitators there, probably in a ratio 1 to 8 participants, or sometimes 10 participants. And we would offer some kind of a method that can induce a holotropic states. So it could be breathing, it could be psychedelics, it could be some shamanic method. And then when it starts happening, we just simply support the process. And we have done enough inner work that we really trust this inner healing intelligence. Like the training that we do involves a lot of personal work. It's not teaching people methods how you fix people. It's basically not to be afraid of it, really be able to support it, and trusting the process even if you don't understand it at a certain point. So the mind, the intellect is not ahead of the process. The explanations follow the process, which has its own dynamics. The next would be the role of spirituality in human psyche and in the cosmos. Psychiatry, psychology, part of the materialistic worldview, the idea is this is a material universe that in a sense created itself, and it's all cause and effect, and life, consciousness and intelligence are kind of latecomers and somewhat of a fluke, something that happens sort of in a very insignificant part of the universe after billions of years of development of matter. So if you have this kind of worldview and you say something about spirit, you say, what do you mean by spirit? So if you apply, psychiatry with this materialistic worldview, then if you sort of involved in something spiritual or mystical, it would be seen as lack of education. You really have not done your study what materialistic science discovered about the universe. It's superstitious, we have terms for it like it's magical thinking, it's a primary process. If you are an intelligent person and still sort of, have some ideas about gods and goddesses, the idea is in psychoanalysis, for example, is that you have leftovers from your infancy, where you saw your parents as these godlike figures, and now you're projecting it and you're making gods and goddesses from them. And if you have direct spiritual experiences, you get a diagnosis, because we don't have that distinction between a mystical experience and a psychotic experience. Okay, if you expand the cartography, you include the perinatal, you include the transpersonal, you will be able to understand what's happening in shamanism, what's happening in rites of passage, where religions came from. They came all from transpersonal experiences. The founders, the early followers, they all had spiritual experiences. Now, when religions become organized, then you end up with dogmas, and many of them lose the connection to the spiritual source. It's then about hierarchies and politics and money and possessions, and you end up. The very important thing is that you don't use contraception in a world where there is AIDS epidemic and danger of population. These are not really. It's nothing to do with spirituality. So, transpersonal psychology is about these spiritual experiences, about transpersonal experiences, not about the dogmas of organized religions. There seems to be insights into psychology of wars, bloody revolutions, genocide, a lot of the human violence. I wrote a paper called The Roots of Human Violence and Greed. A lot of it seems to be coming from the birth trauma, from the perinatal level, which is not recognized officially as being of any relevance. The reason that's given for it that the cortex of the newborn is not myelinized. Myelin is like a fatty substance that covers the neurons. And if that process is not finished in the newborn, we supposedly not be able to have a conscious experience of birth and make a record of birth. On the other hand, a Nobel Prize was given to Eric Kandel for studying the memory mechanisms in a sea slug called aplysia. So, the sea snails have memory, but the newborn baby cannot remember like hours of birth. So if you do this work, you will see people reliving birth every day. We see it all the time. And it's up to the neurophysiologist to explain where it is recorded. Maybe it's recorded in the subcortex, maybe it's recorded in the spinal cord, maybe it's related in every cell of the body. We have seen people who relive birth with a forceps, and you can see quadrangular kind of bruises appearing. Nobody touches them, and the body remembers the pressure of the forceps. So the deeper roots of aggression seem to be going to the birth trauma, to the hours where we couldn't breathe and we were experiencing vital anxiety, and the little crying that happens after birth is nothing as compared to what would be necessary to really process the memory of the birth. And then you have deeper roots of aggression on the transpersonal level. There are archetypes. Jung talked about before the Second World War, the archetype of Wotan and the archetype of Götterdämmerung, twilight of the gods, appearing in the dreams of German patients, and it predicted that there would be a catastrophe that takes over the whole nation, and that the nature will be war will be self-destructive. Okay, that some other insights would have to do, and I already mentioned some examples. related to the nature of consciousness and relationship to matter. In traditional materialistic science, the idea is that consciousness comes of the brain, from the brain, comes from the processes, neurophysiological processes in the brain. Very few people realize that we have absolutely no proof that consciousness is coming from the brain. What we have is a lot of observations showing close correlations between what is happening in the brain and states of consciousness. So nobody questions the fact that we know about these correlations, but you can question the conclusions that were made from it, that these are proofs that consciousness is actually coming from the brain. And an example of what I mean would be a television. You have systematic correlations between the quality of the sound and the picture and the program, the quality of the program and what is happening in the TV set. But we would laugh if somebody would sort of try to study the components and know everything about the television set and then believe that you will understand why at 7 o'clock you get a Mickey Mouse cartoon. We know how television works, so we know that it's possible that the set somehow mediates the program but doesn't really generate it. And this is, very, very possible for consciousness. Consciousness is a cosmic phenomenon, and a certain selection of the overall cosmic fabric is sort of mediated through our brain, and you can leave all the observations, all the experiments intact, but you don't make the conclusion that these are proofs that consciousness is coming from the brain. And many years ago I saw in a bookstore the book by Francis Crick, and it said the astonishing hypothesis, a Nobel Prize winning scientist explains consciousness. I said, well, I have to read that book. So you open it, and there's this statement of this astonishing hypothesis that you, your joys and hopes and fears are nothing by the activity of the neurons in your brain. You're nothing but a pack of neurons. Well, it's not astonishing hypothesis. It comes from basic metaphysical assumptions that the universe is material. So you start reading it, and this says, well, let's simplify it a little. When I'm watching Moitsa, there is a material object, light is reflected, it creates a reaction in my retina, electric charges, chemical changes, that triggers the neuronal impulse that goes through the optical tract, more electricity, more chemical changes, and you end up with electric potentials and chemical changes in the suboccipital cortex. And then he gives a number of pages, probably 40 pages of experiments showing that when I am watching here, this is really happening in my brain. But then he leaves it there, you see. But this is where really the problem begins. What is it that makes out of chemical changes and electric changes a reasonable facsimile of what I'm watching, gives it to me in fully conscious experience with colors and projects it all out there. This, Immanuel Kant showed that there's a difference between phenomena, how the world appears to us, and noumena, what things really are. This is a very complicated problem. The idea that we experience the world the way it is not very believable. And actually, what we know for sure about the world is what we experience. Stars are not about, astronomy is not about stars. It's about human experiences of what we call stars. And we know that a lot of that experience is added by consciousness. There are no colors in the world. There are no sounds in the world. Certainly no tastes, no smells. All the things that make the experience of the world meaningful, they're all added to consciousness. I can give you Beethoven's Ninth Symphony in the language of physics, and you get sort of, you know, frequencies and vibrations. It's not going to be an experience of Beethoven's symphony. We have now, not only is this not a convincing hypothesis derived from the fact that there are correlations, but we have a number of observations showing that consciousness can do things that the brain, as we understand it, could not possibly do. And I mentioned already the near-death experiences. You cannot experience, when you're in a coma, your brain cannot give you an experience of watching it from the ceiling, or experience something that's happening behind the walls. That's beyond the capacity of the brain, the way we understand it. There is research showing that organically blind people, who have never seen anything in their life, when their consciousness gets out of the body, they can see. There's a research by Ken Ring called Mindsight, when blind people can, in near-death experiences, see the environment. And he's interested in what he calls veridical out-of-body experiences, which means that not only they see, but what they see can be validated consensually by people who have the gift of sight. And we have, a number of those kinds of experiences now, that all would be anomalous experiences. Okay. This would really take a lot of time, but these are the 4 stages of birth: the immediately prenatal state, the situation where the uterus contracts, then and the cervix is not open, and then the struggle through the birth canal after the cervix opens, and the last one is the baby coming out, feet first or head first, the umbilical cord being cut. And when we are reliving these stages, then we experience specific emotions for each of these stages, specific physical sensations, and a certain selective opening into the collective unconscious. So let's say with the second matrix, you can get connection to experiences of prisoners of all ages, or people in locked wards of psychiatric hospitals, or people who are, under the control of the Inquisition, for example, in kind of no exit, hopeless situations where they suffer and they don't have much chance to get out of them. The selective opening into the historical collective unconscious for the third matrix would be revolutions. You get images as you are reliving your birth, struggling sort of to be born. You can, if images from the collective unconscious that involve revolutions, enough of oppression will overthrow the tyrant and we'll all breathe freely again. A lot of talk about free breathing in revolutions and so on. I would like to refer you to the website that I have, which is my full name, stanislavgrof.com, and you find a lot of information about many of the things we are talking, and also some things that we don't have time for. I will just sort of move, and if we have time, we can sort of talk a little more about these matrices. That's a really very important aspect of the unconscious that, behind the process of psychospiritual death and rebirth, that appears so much in the ritual and spiritual history of humanity. Okay, I really would like to say something about holography, because we were very, very excited in transpersonal circles, and this is the best bridge between science and mysticism, spirituality that I know. So to make a hologram, you need laser. The mathematics underlying underlying holography was developed by Denis Gabor, who's a Hungarian-British scientist, to improve the functioning of electronic microscopes. And at the time when he developed his mathematics, you couldn't make holograms because they require laser. Okay? Laser light is light which is monochromatic. That means all light in the laser has the same frequency, the same wavelength, which is really just the reverse aspect of that. And they're also coherent. The light is coherent. Normally the ray would sort of oscillate in one directions, whereas here they are all in step. So it's a very, very powerful monochromatic coherent beam of light. You send it against a glass plate which is partially covered by silver. It functions as a what we call one-way screen. Half of the light gets through, half of the light is reflected. If you put a lot of silver there, it's going to be a mirror. If you don't put silver there, you just see clearly. If you do it in between, half of the light would be reflected, half of the light goes through. Now the one on the right side goes and hits the object that you are making a hologram of and is reflected towards the film plate. And then the second half is reflected and hits the same film plate, and then something that you call interference. Like if you throw pebbles into a pond, you get concentric circles, the Huygens circles, and they will meet and then they will interfere. When two waves meet, they can either build up, the crests are added, and you get a big wave, or they cancel each other, and you get what's called a trough. Now, in the world of light, the high amplitude would be light points of the hologram, and the trough would be dark points of the hologram. Now, if you do a regular photography, you get a negative and you cut off one half, you lose half of the information. This is not what happens in the hologram. The hologram has distributed memory. That means the information is spread throughout the hologram. Gregory Bateson gave the example of a spider. Spider has 8 legs, and you have the spider web, and the information about the fly is distributed in the whole net. So through receiving the different vibrations, he can, without seeing, he can sort of get directed to the fly. Also, no matter what you take a picture of, it will always be these what's called moire patterns, these concentric patterns. In regular negative, you can still tell those are people, those are trees, those are houses. In a hologram always looks like this, so you have no clue what's in it until you illumine it with a laser light, and then you get the three-dimensional image of that object. And what you see here is that the information about this apple is distributed all through the hologram, so you can cut it in hundreds of pieces, and you can illumine each part of it, and you get the whole picture. Now this, puts a very different perspective, or creates a very different perspective on the relationship between part and the whole. If the mystic tells you, I am a small part of the universe, I know it, but then again, I'm the whole universe. Says, what do you mean? I mean, don't you know Aristotelian logic? You have to make a choice. Are you a part or are you the whole? But this is not true in holography. In holography, the whole is contained in each of those parts. Very much like in the esoteric systems that tell you we are a microcosm that somehow contains the whole macrocosm. So when the mystic is saying, I know that I am an insignificant part of the universe, you think in terms of Galileo. You study what can be weighed and what can be measured. I look at myself, how much do I weigh? How much do I measure? And then you have this enormous universe, billions of galaxies, and you are an insignificant part of it. Now the other statement, I am also the whole universe, refers to the information that I can get. I can experience myself as anything in the universe, including the whole universe. So in that sense, I am really the whole universe. It's two parts of that statement, I'm an insignificant part, and the whole does not refer to the same reality. One is discusses the material world, the other one discusses the inner experience. So when I experience myself as an elephant, if you put me on a scale, it's not going to be 3 tons. It's going to be significant, but not, not 3 tons. But I can experience myself, what it is like to be an elephant. I can have the experience of it. And that doesn't take any space. The whole universe can be experienced. In the world of waves and vibrations, there's no competition. There might be interference, but we sit here with all the shortwave radio stations of the world, of all the different television programs that are beaming there. It's an enormous amount of information that is here with us. If we had the right way of accessing it, we could now watch Star Trek or Playboy Channel or a Mickey Mouse cartoon. In the world of consciousness, you get access to this information by changing your consciousness. You don't go anywhere and change your consciousness. Now I spent some time in the holographic laboratory in Honolulu, where they show you that you can make a hologram of a number of people, and with each person you change the angle of the laser, and you develop it after you make all these exposures. And then if you illumine the hologram, with each different angle, one person will kind of come out of nowhere, disappear, and then you get the next one as you are changing the laser. Very much like being in a visionary state where you can do it in darkness and out of nowhere come these pictures. Very much like in a session that these pictures they come and go. You can also do something else. You can take a number of people and you don't change the angle of the laser, and then you get like one body, one head, and it will be the information about all those people would be occupying the space of one body. I saw a picture which was a child of Hawaii, and you look at it, it's just looks like one child, but then you can see all of them sort of the different, looking at it and sort of focusing differently. You get the lots of different people that sort of come out of that. That's a model for another kind of experience that you can have in a non-ordinary state. Like I remember, Christina sitting for me, and I would look at her, and she was all women. She was sort of a little girl, and then she was an old crone, and then she was sort of beautiful Hawaiian native, and then she was like a medieval witch. So it was like all that was like in that one vision. There is the Terminator 2, if you saw that. It was made of liquid nitrogen, and it was taking the form of all these different people. And then Arnold Schwarzenegger gets into this kettle of boiling metal of some kind, and then as he is dying, you can see different of these faces sort of coming out of this, bubbling hot metal. There was a Star Trek sequence where an entity would enter the Enterprise and could take on the form of all the crew, the whole crew, and they finally got her and zapped her with the laser gun. And as this entity was dying, she was taking these you know, on the faces of all the people that he or she had become. So I take it one step further. You can make a hologram of a hologram, and you get a projection hologram. And in this Honolulu laboratory, they were offering as a special favor that they would make holograms of newlyweds for free. And you could choose whether you come there one after the other, and you make a hologram where you are like in a kind of tantric fusion. There's one body, and kind of it's the bride and the bridegroom fusing together. Like can experience here happen in good lovemaking, where you really feel like one with the partner. Or you can go, the two of you are photographed, and then the hologram will show both of you. There will be two bodies. So if the projection hologram, we could sort of send it out of the plate, and we would have two new members here standing. Okay. If the hologram is good, it can fool you. When holography first came, there was a jeweler in New York City who had a hologram of a hand reaching into the street with a pearl necklace, and people would come and try to get it, and of course there's nothing there. So now, if we had this projection hologram of those two people, and it was seen by a pygmy or by a child, they would think those are two people. Now, if you know something about holography, the holograms cannot stand on their own. You have to have something else to create a hologram. And what it comes out of a completely undifferentiated ocean of light. The semblance of these separate entities come from interference. I talk about how the dark places of the hologram happen and the light places. So seeing this as two separate entities is a very pedestrian kind of perception, a sophisticated perception that you know that under the separation there is undifferentiated world. Now David Bohm, who's a physicist, who's a co-worker of Einstein and wrote also books, very, very good books on both Einstein's theories of relativity and quantum physics. He had a model of the universe where he talked about the unfolded order and the enfolded, or the implicate, the explicate order, where this, what we are experiencing here, in the material world is like the holograms. And the creative matrix is in another dimension of reality that we cannot perceive in the ordinary state of consciousness. We have to be in a non-ordinary state of consciousness to know that this exists. I talk about the insight that the mystics have into like the cosmic kitchen, how the reality is created. So there's a matrix that creates this. This cannot stand on its own, according to David Bohm. So it doesn't take a lot of brain to experience the world as made of separate entities, but to realize that under it is undifferentiated unity. You would have to study Whitehead's philosophy, or you would have to be quantum relativistic physicists. So see the world as made of separate objects is kind of a pedestrian, unsophisticated perception of the world, and the idea that there is underlying unity behind the world of separate phenomena is really a deeper understanding. So I think I will end this hologram here, and I think I have some pictures. This was a story of, I thought I was getting something else, but this was a man who, in the holotropic breathwork, was reliving birth and suddenly was opening into completely different images, where he saw this fortress on a rock by the ocean, and then suddenly he saw a lot of blood sort of flowing down into the ocean. And then he started seeing the fortress which was on top of the mountain. There's all kinds of, where they were sleeping, where they kept their ammunition. There was a tunnel. He got into this tunnel from the birth canal. And then there were battles that were happening. This is the tunnel. And then he experienced himself as being gored by a sword, being killed and being thrown over the ramparts and dying on the ocean. And then he had the feeling that these were Spanish soldiers, that the place was more like Scotland or Ireland. And so, on an impulse, he went on a vacation to Ireland and then came back and was showing the slides in his family. And he found out that he shot 11 pictures in a direction where nothing interesting was to be seen. So when he took the map, figured out which direction he was shooting, and he realized that there were ruins there that he couldn't really see of a fortress called Dunan or Forte de Oro, Golden Fortress. And then he went to history. He found out that 1580, when Great Britain was in war with Spain, a group of Spanish soldiers landed there, and they took over the fortress, and then the British besieged the fortress, and it was actually Walter Raleigh who brought smoking to England from the New World colonies. He negotiated with the Spaniards that if they opened the gates, they will let them go. So they opened the gates, and of course they didn't honor the treaty and went in and just slaughtered them all and threw them over the ramparts. Now this person experienced himself as a priest. He was not a soldier. At one point he saw a crucifix, and he saw his hand, a Bible, and his hand with the seal ring, and the sealing had initials, and he painted that. This is him dying on the beach, and this is the ring. And so this was really mind-blowing for him. And then he still wasn't quite satisfied, and he found a very detailed document that said that they had a priest with them, and they gave the name, and the initials on the ring matched the name that he found in the archives. So this was one of the interesting stories where we could find some kind of a, something in the historical archives that seemed to, at least showing like an amazing coincidence or between what the people were saying and what you find in these archives. And I mentioned that my introduction to this world of holotropic states was durch LSD. And so this is Albert Hofmann at the time when he discovered LSD. I'm very grateful to him. I see him as my kind of spiritual father or something, somebody who really changed my life dramatically. And so I want to show you a few pictures of the meetings with Albert. This is described as a preface to a book that came several months ago out in English. And it's called, in English, Mystic Chemist. This is the institute where we did all this research in Maryland. And this is on the left Albert visiting us, and then Walter Penke, who did this Good Friday experiment where he gave psilocybin to students of theology and showed that the experiences that they had could not be distinguished from those that you find in spiritual literature. And the other person is Helen Bonney, who was our therapist, music therapist. This was about over 20 years ago, maybe 23 years ago, a visit to their beautiful home in a village called Berck in Switzerland on the French border. This is Anita Hoffman. This is Christina, for those of you who haven't seen her. This is in their garden. These are two visionary artists who just happened to be there. Roberto Venosa died 2 years ago, and I just got a message about Martina Hoffman, that all her art was destroyed by the flood in the Baltic. This is Hans-Ruedi Giger, who got the Oscar for the movie Alien, and then also inspired the sequences, and then had a role in the film Prometheus more recently. This is this museum in Gruyere. This is the size of his pictures, very perinatal. I just the book that I wrote about Giger is just being published now in German, in Switzerland, and we became good friends, and his wife did the training with us, and we had actually 2 training modules in the upper floor of his museum, and in the first one we invited Albert Hoffmann to spend a day with us. So this was a panel discussion, Hoffmann and Giger, and some of you might know Tev, the moderator. He is on the left there. This is the end of the module. This is Carmen, Hans-Ruedi's wife, on the right side. This was the goodbye. This was September, 4 months before his 100th birthday. And then I went back to Basel to celebrate his 100th birthday. This was in the Natural Museum, Museum of Natural History. And then these are, he was 102 in this picture. There was an exhibition, a forum, a meeting, a congress in Basel called Psychedelic Forum. He was still on the program. He was supposed to give a lecture, but he didn't feel well, so he invited us to spend the afternoon with him, which we didn't sort of. We are not terribly sorry about it, and this is 4 weeks before his death. He was 102. Okay. Huh. Sorry.
Going backwards.
I don't know what happened here. Okay. So this is the last picture. He's holding Alex Gray's, who is another great visionary artist. Okay, so I think we can take, how are we doing with time?
15 to 8. 15 minutes to 8 o'clock.
So do you want to break, or do you want to ask some questions? Anybody?
Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I have one. Can you describe one or more examples of your work with psychedelics with clients that had a diagnosis of schizophrenia or borderline or something like that?
Well, we had schizophrenia. I know the question of diagnosis in Europe is much stricter definition for schizophrenia. It comes from the work in Burghölzli. We have primary symptoms, and secondary symptoms where hallucinations or delusions are really not enough for giving the diagnosis of schizophrenia. In America, it's much more liberal, to call people schizophrenics. I had the experience of several patients who would be diagnosed as psychotics, where we were able, with psychedelics, accelerate the process and they would get through. One of these patients was described in my book, When the Impossible Happens, about sort of unorthodox methods in psychiatry. She started experiencing connection, strange connection with her boss. He was a psychologist, and she fell in love with him, and she had the feeling, she was convinced that he was in love with her. She couldn't have an orgasm in her everyday life, but she hallucinated him sending her orgasm. So in these visions of him, she had great sort of sexual experiences. At one point he promised that he would marry her and that he already arranged her divorce. So she packed suitcases and came to his apartment and rang the bell, and his wife sort of opened, and she was moving with her kids and with her suitcases into their apartment. And of course she ended up in our, in the Psychiatric Research Institute. And we tried all kinds of things and nothing was helping, so she started this work with sequential LSD sessions. And she experienced first a lot of things from her child. These were like medium dosages, not the high dosages that we were using later. And then she got to a situation where those are birth experiences, not just sort of the biographical experiences, postnatal biographical experiences. And then she experienced something that she calls psychological Hiroshima. And she had the experience of death and rebirth. And I expected that she would sort of show, major improvement. But she already sort of distanced herself from the psychosis in the biographical work. She said this was projection of her father, her sort of relationship with her father. And she already sort of had insights into it, and now she fell back into this situation where she came, but now it was not her boss, it was me now. She was experiencing sort of distant contact, contact with me, and I was giving her great experiences. And I, at that time, went to Amsterdam to a conference. I was gone for about 5 days, and she continued having these experiences. And then I was doing therapy, sort of in her experiences. And some of the things where I would have really recommended or done, she really had it down. And she started sort of addressing me differently. Normally you use a kind of a formal, in Czech, I'm sure you have the same, you can distinguish whether you are talking with somebody in authority or with somebody with a lover or kid. So she started calling me Stania, which is like what I was called, in my childhood, and using this informal you, T instead of V. Okay. And I continued, doing the sessions with her, and then she had a session where she became absolutely straight, and she was experiencing sort of positive experience in the womb, and then she came back and switched back to a formal interaction, and was really in a state that then remained. I left for the United States, and she then became involved in the breath work. My mother actually started doing breath work, and her earliest holotropic sessions were with my mother. Then my mother sort of collected a group of psychiatrists and psychologists that could later do our training. We could come to the United States. So I had, good follow-up, and none of these things ever returned. In this stage where she had this transference psychosis, you would call it. I mean, if you want, compared to transference neurosis that Freud was talking about. For that, the nurses had a lot of fun because they found her. She was kind of catatonic. She was standing on her toes and sort of like this. And the nurses came, "What are you doing?" They said, "Leave me alone, I'm embracing him." And she had me figured how tall I was, so they had a lot of fun with this. So it was like catatonic postures. Also, she took catatonic postures on the bed. And the difference of a catatonic patient was if you addressed her, she would come out of that position and she would tell you that she was back in the womb, she was a twin, and that certain positions were more comfortable than others. She was competing for the space. And then the other catatonic positions were like interaction with me, with the virtual me. So that was probably the most interesting. I mean, whatever diagnosis you want to give her, I described the symptomatology. And, it was really, one of the major changes that I have seen. Doing exactly the opposite from what you would do, give them tranquilizers and holding the experiences down. It was like a tendency to accelerate it. And in traditional psychiatric literature, you have some cases where they say the psychotic break actually had therapeutic impact. People ended up in a better place than they were before. And they say that it seemed that it happened particularly frequently after people had experiences of death, rebirth, or destruction of the world and recreation of the world. And the episodes are very acute. The acute episodes have much better prognosis than those that are what we call oligosymptomatic, just a few symptoms and slowly developing and so on. If something is really intense, you have a good chance to work with it and get people through. It's interesting that we do the opposite. We try to stop the process rather than accelerating it. And you have to also distinguish with whom you are working. It's not, if people are strongly paranoid, like my neighbor is digging tunnels into my house and into my cellar, and he's getting into my house at night, and he's poisoning my food. Is very different from saying, I have energies going up my spine, and I have visions of deities or something like that. That's a good candidate probably for alternative approach where we work with that person. The other one would accept help, like if you go and find the bugging devices that the neighbor sort of put into her house, or help her with some legal intervention against the neighbor. There's a whole other feeling about people who have what we call spiritual emergency, and people who are into sort of some kind of heavy paranoid delusions and hallucinations and so on. Somebody in spiritual emergency will tell you in a very articulate way wild experiences, like somebody who just had 300 micrograms of LSD, but it's really coherent and it's reporting. It's not sort of all over the place. Like that other person with the neighbor, they can say, why is the neighbor doing it? Well, it's really on the payroll of the mafia, and the money really comes from the Middle East. It's all petrodollars. You get stories like that, and there's not much hope to do this kind of alternative work with people. But if you see that in the middle of a birth process, or they're having past life experiences, or they're seeing archetypal visions, that's a whole other experience.
Can I just ask you, do you have any ideas how to assist the other people that aren't in spiritual emergency, that are
it depends how deep the mistrust is. But the major problem is that they are using the mechanism of projection. Like, there's nothing wrong with me, it's somebody is doing it from the outside. The neighbor, the Martians, the mafia, and so on. If you would have to bring them to the point where they want to do inner work and sort of own the process in some way, or at least open to the suggestion that this is something that's coming from within them. And they would be, depending on the way they express it, there would be some situations where you probably would use tranquilizers, but not indiscriminately for everybody. You have to determine whether they seem to be good candidates for, some inner work that you would support. And then if it's questionable, you can try it and see if it works. But a lot of the cases are very clear where you see, I can work with this person, or this doesn't seem to work, or this will not work. Projection is a really difficult one, and the person wants to put it all outside rather than knowing that it's happening inside.
I would like to know, how did you develop this method of holotropic breathing?
Well, I knew some of the things from the work with psychedelics. For example, initially we thought that you never have any influence on how the session will end. Some people ended up in great place, like Albert, had a difficult session where the neighbor was a witch and was hexing him and he was dying and sent for a doctor. But when the doctor came back, he now relived his birth and he was a newborn and a lot of these problems were solved. So sometimes it ended up in a really good place, and sometimes it opened up something and was not sort of well closed. And so we initially waited, 10 days. There is a time when you cannot get the same reaction from LSD. You have to wait, and it's been shown in animal experiments with rabbits and so on. So we waited 10 days and we will run another session and hope that it will close better than the previous one. And then there were a couple of instances where the patients were unresolved, but they had some distinct physical problems, and they asked me to do some intervention. Like the first, I remember, had pain in the shoulders and were really angry, and said, "Could you put some pressure here?" And so I was, started massaging it, put pressure. He said, "Not enough," and my thumb was already like this, and I didn't feel comfortable putting so much pressure. But then this scream came out, and he started coughing and shaking, and within a relatively short time, he was really fine. He was relaxed, and there was a good closure of the session. Another one was ended up with problems like a nausea. I would just touch it, and there was a projectile vomiting. And, again, within a very short time, this patient was in a good place. And so I thought there was a system that I could follow. So when somebody was coming down, I would ask them how they feel. And if something was unfinished, I would say, "Well, do you want to work on it?" And I would just go for the places where there was stuck energy and ask people to express it somehow. And anyway, they sort of feel like expressing it. And this is what we are doing at the end of the holotropic sessions now. And then several of these patients, as we were doing this work, started what's called saccadic breathing, so very short, very fast breathing. And they told me that the fast breathing brought them back into the session. The drug effect was already wearing off, and the breathing took them back. So I knew that you can somehow activate the unconscious with fast breathing. And then I went from the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center that you saw. I took a year off to write a couple of books, and Michael Murphy, the co-founder of Esalen, invited me to write the books at Esalen, which is a beautiful place on the ocean, the hot springs and so on. And I was trading workshops for room and board, basically the house and the food. And in my workshop I was talking to people, what happened, the cartography and the other kinds of healing, intelligence. And they were not very happy. They said, well, it's nice to hear about all these experiences. Can't we do something? Do you have something on the side, you know? And I said, sorry, we don't have the permission here to use psychedelics. And then, you know, I met Christina. Christina was a yoga teacher at that time, and her father was a musician. She was, you know, a really good ear. And then we put this together where people were, you know, breathing and we were playing music. There was always somebody in the group who was quickly triggered, and then we would work with them, and the other people would sort of watch. Sometimes it triggered more than once, so Christina worked with one person, I worked with another, and then some people in the group were supporting that person out there until one of us is ready to support them. And then we had a session schedule, 46 people coming, and they come to Esalen from all over the world, like from Australia, South America, 46 people, and I was working in the garden, and I was lifting some heavy beam, and it threw off my back, and it was really, really painful. It was, and we had a, you know, king-size bed, and Christina was on one side, I was on the other, and when she moved, it was like I was getting a dagger into my back. And I said, what are we going to do? You know, if you work with people, you get all these sort of movements with, you know, your body. I couldn't imagine working with anybody and getting some more of what I had already. And so I said, what are we going to do? And then we said, well, we're going to let them work with each other, and we just sort of supervise it and tell them what to do. And so we did this, and the session was such a success that we never did it differently. People pair up, and one half works and the other half sits, which we call it sit. It's not a good term really. We are looking still for a good term. It's very important, the presence of this other person. And not only had, you know, many people's experiences, but the sitters just loved that. They said, you know, how important it was for them to be involved so intimately in the process of another person, and how much they learned about their own process and so on. So we have used, ever since we have used this combination when people sit for each other, and then we have maybe for each 10 persons we would have, or 8, we would have a trained facilitator, and they would go to wherever some special attention is needed. So it became a format. We've worked with the groups up to 470 people in Moscow before a conference. It was 70, I think, facilitators, I think, were there. And there are no limits to the size of the group that you can work with. If you have enough trained facilitators, it's really powerful to have the music and so many people. It's like it creates an atmosphere. It's so easy to let go, you know. And then you have to have enough what we call breakout rooms. You create small groups that have, let's say, two facilitators each, and then they do the sharing and the processing in a small group. So you have the group experience, but then all the intimacy of the relationship with the sitter, but also the, you know, intimacy of the small group. So when I was in psychoanalysis, the statistic was that your average psychoanalyst can see 80 patients in a lifetime. You know, I met people who were in psychoanalysis for 25 years. And they could give you lectures about why they have the problem, how is it related to early cannibalism and toilet training, and only the problems were still there. And in this group, you know, things can happen, and in many instances they happen behind our back. People do it themselves. We just walk, and there are breakthroughs. So we do a lot of work with people, but in many instances it's not necessary. They just breathe, and things come up, and you know, then it quiets down, and they meditate, and then go and paint the mandala, and that's check with us. You know, we ask them to check with us before they leave, but that's all there is to it. there are always instances where we really have to work a lot, even early in the session. When somebody starts moving out of their place, moving to somebody else's space, then it could be really a lot of work that has to be done. People who have some experience, they can really heal themselves to a great extent. And it's very empowering. And if you experience some improvement and you have a therapist that takes the credit for it, you don't recognize your own healing potential. Whereas if you do it yourself, it seems to have influence on people's self-esteem. It's a whole other situation. From the other side, we have people who were trained like I was, the psychiatrist and the doctor, who find it difficult to sit on their hands. They feel like they should be there poking people or doing something. It's very difficult to see how people can help themselves.
Could you maybe explain how altered breathing opens up the unconscious? The mechanism of it?
Well, the breathing sort of changes the relationship between the unconscious dynamic and the consciousness. They're sort of emotionally charged contents in the psyche, and there's something that we call defense mechanisms that kind of hold it back. You don't want to re-experience past pain, so you kind of hold it down. And the breathing creates a situation where it favors the unconscious. I mean, either it sort of gives a boost to the unconscious, or it lowers the defenses, and you start seeing the unconscious material emerging. And it's really something that Jung described about active imagination, that this process selects the contents which are emotionally important and closest to the threshold of consciousness. Now, the physiology of it is really complex. It would require a good laboratory to really find out what's happening there, because there's a number of processes that are happening. One is if you breathe faster, it also depends on what's called the dead space. There's always a space where there's no mixing of gases. So depending on how deep it is, it gets all the way into the lungs, or it's sort of into the alveoli, or it sort of goes, doesn't go all the way. Then generally, if it's a situation where you get more oxygen, you also exhale more carbon dioxide, which means the blood becomes alkaline. And then we have a mechanism that the hemoglobin binds more oxygen in an acidic environment. And it makes a lot of sense if you are running or in some heavy sports, you have acidic metabolites. And so the hemoglobin becomes more effective in binding more oxygen. So if you have alkaline blood, you might get more oxygen, but less of it is really transported. Then you have the kidneys trying to, there's a homeostatic mechanism that's trying to make the blood less alkaline, so it excretes more alkaline urine. And then it also depends on how the vessels would respond. Do they contract? Usually when it reactivates something traumatic, you can get sort of first increased contractions and so on. I think that what you get eventually is something that you would experience in high mountains, somewhere, that you actually get little less oxygen, and you have compensatory breathing, and you exhaling the carbon, you're exhaling the carbon dioxide. And then the neocortex is more sensitive, like when you get drunk, you see all the inhibitions can go, and the impulses could come that would not come if you were in full control. So the unconscious material starts emerging. It's very interesting that if you have the so-called high altitude disease, as they call it, some people are ecstatic and some people have headaches, and they have to sort of deal with some physical discomfort, which in my experience is coming from the traumatic memories. So you can have breathing sessions where people don't have any negative experiences at all, and others, they have a very hard time. A lot of unpleasant experiences would come. So I believe there's some kind of relationship. And then it's interesting, that you have the cultures like the Peruvians and the Tibetans who live in the high altitudes and have very spiritual tradition. But again, there are some compensatory mechanisms that you produce more erythrocytes and so on. So they don't have quite the same reaction to the altitude as we do when we come from low, just to visit from low altitudes.
Do you have any personal experience or experiential stuff with your ancestors? Some communication with with your ancestors?
Not really, but I have seen many people who do. Ancestral experiences are very common. I have written a book, Our House Burned Down, 2001 in February. Our house burned down with all my books, over 3,000 books, and all the protocols, all the information that hadn't been used yet in the books was all gone. Rick Tarnas and I wanted to write the book about the correlations with the astrological transits. He's a brilliant astrologer, and I had thousands of sessions with dates and so on. This was all gone. And so I decided to write a book where I don't need any references, where you don't have to quote other people's work and so on. And so the biographical, the most kind of self-revealing, and the more, the one that's kind of self-incriminating at times. But because we had so many experiences, I decided to write only about experiences and observations that current materialistic science would consider to be impossible. Like amazing synchronicities and so on. It's about 1/3 of the book is synchronicities, where it seems like the external reality is getting into a kind of playful interaction with your psyche. And then you have several of the experiences when, for example, people experienced something from the childhood of their mother, or something that happened before your conception. There was in a Swedish workshop was a woman from Finland, and she experienced a birth, and then it opened up into battles and wars. And she recognized that in one of those experiences she became her father in the Russo-Finnish war, which the father actually was in, and he was hiding in a birch forest, and a bullet came and just scraped him. And she experienced it. I said, can you go check, but don't tell him what you experienced, just sort of, let him talk about it. And it was an accurate thing. This happened 13 years before her conception. And he confirmed that ultimately, that it was something that really actually happened. And so he never described it, he never talked about it, because it was just a scratch, It wasn't that serious.
You mentioned active imagination earlier.
Which one?
Active imagination, the method of...
Yeah, the Jung's method. Yeah.
Yes, Jung's method. Would you say the two methods are comparable, or what are similarities, what are differences? The method of active imagination and holotropic breathwork.
I never read that Jung was doing something like bodywork, or although there was this movie, what was it called, The Dangerous Method or something, where he is actually beating the Sabina Spielrein. Anybody saw that movie? Yeah, I don't know if that's something that you really would do. So there would have been some physical contact, but not the kind of contact that we have. I mean, the basic idea is there, that you want to see the material emerging from the psyche rather than analyzing something that happened a long time ago. That also you have a method that catches somehow the contents in the psyche that are important, relevant, because they have a strong emotional charge, and that they are also most available because they're closest to the threshold of consciousness. I haven't read that he would, like as people breathing faster, or that he would do any body work. He just was there, and it was happening in their psyche. They're just allowing the dream to unfold. He was relying also on the self-healing, and that concept of self-healing was certainly in his work, where the idea was that the intellect, you cannot figure out the psyche of another person with your intellect, because the psyche is cosmic. He talked about anima mundi. So the intellect is a small part of the psyche that is good in everyday life to orient ourselves, but it's the psyche is cosmic. The intellect cannot figure out the psyche any more than we can figure out what's happening in the Big Bang. Suddenly time and space appears. The psyche is a big mystery. It's Victor Hugo wrote in Les Miserables, that I really love. He said there is one spectacle which is grander than the ocean, and that's the heavens. And there's one spectacle which is grander than the heavens, and that's the human psyche, the human soul. And you get this kind of understanding of that. So what he wanted to do something that would mediate the exchange between the conscious ego and what he called the self, which is like a sort of higher aspect of the client. And the healing was self-healing. And he called himself like a co-adventurer. He also had the idea that the psyche was infinitely creative, that something can happen that nobody has ever described, which we certainly have seen. We had a woman who had 4 years of depression, and she relieved at ESMA and relieved something from her birth, and then was doing something for 40 minutes, was chanting, and it was like some kind of a ritual. And we had a psychoanalyst who was Jewish, coming from Buenos Aires, and he was there, and he came to us and said, "This is fantastic, do you know what happened?" We said, "No." And he said, she was singing in perfect Sephardic. That's a medieval mixture of Spanish and Hebrew. She didn't know Spanish or Hebrew, and certainly not Sephardic, but it was the hobby of this Jewish analyst who was in our group. And so we said, what was she singing all the time, sort of the same? And he said, I'm suffering and I will always suffer. I'm crying and I will always cry. I am praying and I will always pray. And this took her out of the depression, Now, you don't find in any book, psychiatric book, that singing a Sephardic prayer is going to help with your depression. And I don't understand to this day what happened there, but I've seen her a couple of times since that time, and the depression didn't come back. Now you cannot promised people that they, get out of the depression in one session. But we have seen that. And sometimes very weird, very weird sort of mechanisms that are involved. Please.
How has knowing astrology changed your everyday life?
That's a subject kind of opens a can of worms. I have worked with Richard Tarnas, who was really a brilliant astrologer. He wrote a book, Cosmos and Psyche, that he worked on for 30 years, showing that throughout history there were consistent transits happening for wars, consistent transits for major breakthroughs in science, consistent correlation with the development of the feminist movement and so on. The history of flights, like you have Uranus, Jupiter was there when the first flight, the brothers Montgolfier were showing the hot air balloon in Paris, and then you take it, all contributions to flight. Then you come to Kitty Hawk, the first airplane, and then you end up with the moon. And wars, revolutions had always Saturn, Pluto, or Saturn, Pluto, Mars. Like 9/11 had Saturn, Pluto, and Mars in hard aspect in a T-square. So I showed you the perinatal matrices, and if you read about the phenomenology, what people experience in the context of those matrices, how many of you know anything about astrology? You do, okay. You have the question. Okay, so if I tell you that when people relive the first matrix, it could be the experience of actually being the fetus in a water environment, that it can take you to the experience of being in the cosmos, so the cosmic, something about water. It could be melting of boundaries, it could be mystical union. What would come to your mind as an astrologer? As an archetype, as an astrological archetype?
Is it the first one?
Yeah,
Neptune.
What? Neptune, of course, yeah. Then if I tell you that the second matrix is about oppression, depression, compression, starvation, because with the
Saturn.
it's a Saturn, it's a shadow aspect. Saturn also has the relationship to structure, the order, and so on. And there's sort of certain things that are useful with the Saturn archetype. Now this third is mind-blowing. You say powerful energies. It is about birth. It's about death. It's about rebirth. And what you find, you would see, those of you who come to tomorrow, we have sometime before the workshop, I will show the death rebirth slideshow. This situation of choking and pain generates a sexual energy, or energy that you cannot differentiate from sexual. So birth, sex, death, rebirth, powerful energies, and also elimination. You can encounter the biological materials, including urine and feces, if there was no enema and catheter. So, which kind of archetype would it be in an astrological handbook?
Pluto.
Pluto, of course. And then you have sudden, unexpected resolution of a difficult situation, breakthrough, visions of light, divine epiphany, influx of fantastic insights, ideas. What would that be? Uranus. So your major astrological archetypes: Neptune, Saturn, Pluto, and Uranus. Now this is what we saw initially, but then we found out that people actually have experiences of those matrices when they have the corresponding planets as transiting planets. Now that is really interesting. We haven't seen exception to that. That if you have hard aspect of Saturn and no other kind of redeeming other transits, you are going to spend it in the second matrix. It's some kind of a no-exit situation. Doesn't have to take you to birth. It can be some victimizing situation from your postnatal life, or it could be something that takes the form of past life experience when you are in prison. But it would be always a situation of no exit. Let's say the First and Second World War had Saturn, Pluto in a square, 90 degrees. Now, you have a person who has holotropic session or a psychedelic session, and they get a lot of Nazi kind of images, okay? Then they have the feeling that this is like the world of Franz Kafka. They get some association to Bergman's movie, okay? And then you look at it, that person has a Saturn-Pluto transit, and all these situations are connected to it, like Kafka's, Kafka's horoscope, the birth horoscope, Bergman. It can be kind of a sense of life being meaningless, being cut off from God. You get a kind of worldview that is like that of existentialists. And you look at Sartre. Sartre has a Saturn-Pluto hard aspect. And when it was activated in a really poorly handled mescaline experience, it was followed by 14 years of leftover from that, when he wrote, some of his very famous plays, like No Exit, Weak Law, and De Noge à Nausée. So he was writing from that place. But what was connecting all those situations that the person experienced was the same kind of astrological transits, and he actually had that combination at the time when he did the session. So that was a really, really difficult one to accept. That archetypal astrology can have some value here. But the problem is that you have to make a change in your worldview, which is really major. It would look like something like this. There is a source of creative energy that creates the cosmos. Between us and this creative source is a range of archetypes, okay, that form and inform what's happening here. Now, this whole thing is coordinated with movements of the planets and angular relationships that they form. The planets are not doing anything. The idea is not that Mars is sending some kind of red rays and it's hitting your brain and making you angry. The idea is those are like a clock that's telling you what's happening in the archetypal world and what kind of energies you would expect here. Like when I look at my watch and it says 7 o'clock, okay, that's a good chance that if there is a tower with a clock, that I would see something similar there. If I had called a restaurant saying I would like a reservation, for 7 o'clock, and I go there, they would say something like, Mr. Grof, yeah, sure, we have a seat for you. It's written on this paper. I have a good chance when I turn on the television set that I get 7 o'clock news. None of these things cause any other. They are all coordinated with a dimension that we cannot perceive directly, the cosmic time. So this is all synchronistic thinking. It has nothing to do with causal thinking, except maybe what the archetypes are doing this way. But there's no causal connection, with planets. I had a discussion with Carl Sagan, who was a really famous American astronomer. He's the one who created that golden plate that went on the first spaceship that was going out of the solar system. Sort of naked men and women, sort of like Adam and Eve sort of greetings, and then the plan of the solar system. He also did a series of talks about the universe, a very popular program in the television. And he started the program of looking for extraterrestrial intelligence. And we met, and he was livid, when he heard about astrology, and he said, astrology is a total hogwash, He says, as I'm standing here, I have more influence on you than Pluto. Well, he was thinking in terms of, gravitation fields, and what the mass is, my mass and his mass, and how far Pluto is, and he had the near object is more physical influence on me than Pluto. Now, if you're thinking about astrology, to say that he has more influence than Pluto, the correlations of Pluto are like with tidal waves and volcanic eruptions and so on, or the quantum relativistic physicists who work on the atomic bomb, they have that in their chart. He just couldn't understand that this is not about the way he is used to think in terms of direct influence on this level. It's a much more complicated kind of a situation. That's a tough one if you have an academic training in materialistic science. Astrology would be, the last thing you would sort of be willing to consider long after, acupuncture and is that the way you think, or if you're an astrologer, yeah?
Yeah, that's exactly how I think.
Yeah, you don't see that the causal.
No.
Yeah. Jung wrote, when Jung discovered this synchronicity, and he hesitated, he was collecting observations, he hesitated 20 years before he presented it to the academic community, because it violates some of the basic element in scientific thinking, which is cause and effect. We like to see, everything that happens to have a cause and to have an effect. Except we don't like to take it to the cause of causes, where it started, what did it start? But once it's here, it's always cause and effect. So he got encouragement from Einstein. Einstein visited the Jungs, and they had discussion. And Jung told him about synchronicity and said, Einstein encouraged him. He said, this is now emerging in quantum relativistic, or in physics. I don't know exactly which part of physics, maybe he had in mind theory of relativity. And then his Wolfgang Pauli, who was one of the founders of quantum physics, was Jung's patient and then later friend, and he encouraged him that Jung should pursue this idea of synchronicity. And still in the United States now, Jung's essay on synchronicity is published in the same volume as Wolfgang Pauli talking about the solar archetype. So this, physicists have no problem. I mean, when I describe some of the early observations, quantum relativistic physicists have no problem with this stuff. It's the psychiatrists and psychologists that have a problem, because they're still in the 17th century kind of Cartesian Newtonian. If you read some of the stuff that physics are writing about, I mean, this is sober. This is sort of what I'm talking about. 11 dimensions in the world, and superstrings, and one of the models trying to explain what happens in quantum physics is many universes, where everything that happens also sort of splits and is sent into another universe. There's something called it's been a long day. anthropic principle. That Hubble discovered that all the galaxies are moving from each other, so you can now make a computer model where you run it back and you find out that it ends up in a dimensionless point called singularity, and to the Big Bang, sort of out of it came time and space and all the matter that now forms, billions of galaxies. So that's not a very sober, rational explanation for the origin of the universe. But when you look at it, you find out that the various constants there, the size of the particles, the charge of the particles, is within a fraction of a percent. If it were different, the universe would not be able to support life, and something that would happen. So it's a very improbable universe. And so for people who are open to the mystical world, we would say, well, it was designed, there was intelligence behind it. Now Stephen Hawking originally, talked about God very much like Newton. Newton said, "Oh God, I'm thinking your thoughts." And so he thought that this was what was happening in the universe was a confirmation of some higher intelligence. If you read his last book, Grand Design, he's trying to do sort of explain the anthropic principle without, the creative force. And the probability that he computed that this happened by chance, that the universe was created and can support life, was like 1 to 10 to 500. I mean, it's like 10 with 50 zeros. This is the probability. 1 out of so many universes by chance could be this one. Now that's a big number. I would take God any time instead of practically infinite number of universes are created, and this one just happens to be the one that can support life. Break, yeah?
Is your break? Okay. Short break?
Yeah.
Okay.
Very quickly run through Christina's slideshow and just tell you what it would have been about. It's called The Thirst for Wholeness, Addiction, Recovery and Spirituality. And when she starts the talk, she talks about the fact that she has been for 35 years in the field of transpersonal psychology as a speaker, writer and psychotherapist, and worked with many addicts. I have been on a spiritual path since I was a small child. I am also a recovering alcoholic and the adult child of alcoholics. And she also had really difficult sexual abuse in her childhood from her stepfather. So this is what you will see is her own from her own recovery when she was sort of painting these things. And what happened is that she, in the delivery of her first child, activated Kundalini, and then it got stronger with the second child. This was not my child, this was from what she called the practice husband. Then the first time when it happened, they gave her a big dose of morphine. Then the second time they stopped it with tranquilizers, but the energies were still coming. And she went to Swami Muktananda's intensive, she got what's called Shaktipat, and that really sort of opened it up. And then we met and we were sort of doing workshops and traveling. And these episodes came and went, but sometimes in very inconvenient circumstances, like in a 747, the vibrations that sort of triggered. What do you do in a 747? We knew how to work with Kundalini. So she had a style that she would go to the bathroom and just, if she had to make sounds just as loud, so that the stewards and stewardesses don't get alarmed. So this shakes, on the toilet, and they get the sound out, and then comes back. And then she found out that if she drinks, alcohol is available there, that it kind of quiets the energies. But she is from a family of alcoholics, and she got really addicted, or she needed to go through withdrawal. We try to break it through, even psychedelics and the Preddvor, but as long as people are using, you cannot. It's kind of something that you should know. You cannot break it in somebody who's actively using. They have to be sort of the withdrawal. The people have to be sober, and then you can work on the psychological problems. So that's something that you should know watching the slides. And then what played a very important role in the paper was a letter that Bill Wilson, the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, wrote to Jung. He said, Dr. Jung, you probably don't know that you are really a father of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the story was that Jung saw an alcoholic patient, and that there was some improvement, but then there was a relapse, the patient came back, and Jung refused to treat him. He said, the only hope for you is to join some kind of religious group and hope that you would have a spiritual experience. And then Jung said, he said that these patients' craving for alcohol was an equivalent on a low level of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness or the union with God. And then he wrote that the useful formula therefore is spiritus contra spiritum. Spiritus, spirit, with the capital S, against the ravages of spirits, which is the English term for alcohol, spirit. And so then she said how much she finds in the mystical spiritual literature references to thirst. When we visited Mother Teresa in Calcutta, I think, she had a big inscription in her room, "I thirst." And she has a Kabir, who's a 15th century transcendental poet. A little quote, "My body and my mind are in depression because you are not with me. How much I love you and want you in my house. I don't really care about food. I don't really care about sleep. I am restless indoors and outdoors. The bride or seeker wants her lover, God, as much as a thirsty man wants. A thirsty man in desert wants water." Okay, then she had I think that I will mention that really wonderful Hindu story. Just before the creation of the world, only God existed. God soon became bored of being alone, and with his or her ultimate power, God created the world from himself, herself, and that God could play and have some fun. But God also created other gods to help him run the creation. But beings in God's creation had the knowledge who they were. They knew how to merge back to their source. Very soon they became disinterested in the world, and they flocked back to God in heaven. So God was once again bored, and his game was ruined. So God called a meeting of the other gods to ask for help. And one god said, "Why don't we throw everyone out of heaven and close the gates and hide the key?" So God so this was an excellent idea, but he says, "But where do we hide the key?" And one of the gods says, "Put in the ice top in the Himalayas, they will never reach it." And the other one said, no, put it at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. And the third one said, "Put it on the moon, it's so far they will never find it." And then God went into meditation looking into the future, and he said, no, none of our plans will work, you know. They will climb the Himalayas, they will get to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, they will make it to the moon, they will go to the other planets. And then everybody was kind of silent, and then God said, I know it. I know the one place that they never look. They would go millions of miles into the space, but they will not make one little step. You know where it is. It's inside of us. So this is, I think, those are the interesting things from the talk, and I'll show you the pictures just quickly, and then you can. Those of you who are interested, you will have the whole talk available on a website. So the idea is you come from the transcendental realm, and being just the fact of incarnation separates us from the source. Then if we had good mothering, then a little of the connection remains to the divine. Like if you have good womb, good breast, good mother, but if you now have abuse, as she had, there's an added special sort of amount of the separation, and you really get cut off. So she's showing in these pictures, and then talks about the different mechanisms, how you deal with it, creating a mask, and see, this is the abuse. Tell me if I am going too slow or too fast. See this sort of separation is sort of increasing. This is a very interesting one. If you have a really traumatic experience, there's a tendency for consciousness to split from the body, and you kind of could have a transcendental experience as your body is being abused. And you see it in near-death experiences. People have a car accident and their legs broken, and their consciousness goes out, and they have this, transcendental experience. So you create an armor, for example, is one of the defenses. Trying to resist that pressure, and then am I going back? No. Yeah. So this is how the isolation increases, creating a mask, and people don't see what's happening inside. And this is where that thirst for wholeness is expressed, and wanting to have material things is gold and power and food and house and so on. Oh, there's a series now. It's just, if this is true, I wonder if the advertising industry uses that. That's the way they used Freudian symbols, they sort of connect that product with something that the unconscious would read with excitement. And so this is absolute vodka. You can see a lot of star-filled sky, you can see light tunnel, you can see the Native American eagle, peacock, which is a very common symbol, gold, of course. There's only one Jeep. I love this one. In a perfect world, shopping for a car would be easy, and you have to go sort of from the Sistine Chapel thing, buy this one. Mountain, the very powerful spiritual symbol. This is a great one. This is a travel agent offering some tour somewhere, and it says somewhere it could take you lifetimes to reach nirvana, or you can do it in 2 weeks, you know, take our tour. You can see this is using the sort of a combination of angels and that kind of metamorphosis of caterpillar, which is a very common spiritual symbol of transformation. Eagle. You see, smoke Marlboro and sort of going to take you into light. It's an interesting combination with the warning of Surgeon General. I mean, you can really go to light, you know, but in a different way. Now, this looks like a church here, you know. This is a kind of a tunnel. It's typical for let in the light. If you smoke this or drink this. I love this one. This is they made bars, kind of of gold, and this is a play on words. This order gold in bars, and you see this is in bar where you go to drink, or bar of gold. Crystals are very powerful symbol in spiritual systems, or in shamanism. This is you have the sun and the moon, that's the like Hieros Gamos of the masculine and feminine, the star-filled sky. Then you have again the Sistine Chapel, and then you have Taoisms and Buddhisms. I don't know what the others mean, but and here you have peacock. This is a need to control, sort of, and you have the feeling that things are getting out of hand and you're kind of trying to really control what's happening. And this is called the perfect housewife. And, you know, on the surface everything seems to be fine, and this is on the right side, this is really what's happening. You're really cut off from the world, and almost like in a prison. And this was called anorexic to life. There's all this beautiful world around, but you cannot relate to it. She liked to ride horses as a child, and this was a dream where there was this beautiful horse but had no feet. Yeah. This was her image of addiction. As you can see, balancing over this open sort of jaws, the abyss. And this is called surrender, and the kind of hitting the bottom. And then you start seeing some of the images of recovery. There's like where you make a choice between if you continue a certain way, you're going to die, or the other, you have a connection with the world and ultimately to God. You see the peacock over there, at the bottom, the right side. There's the mountain of recovery. Not easy, just hitting bottom doesn't sort of solve the problem. You have a lot of work to do. Again, sort of, something positive starts to be available. This this was the, the reaching for help. Reaching for light. Again, this separation, it's like Peramos in this way. This was me, putting me on a pedestal. They're all kind of on the interface between sort of suffering and positive, suffering, negative things and positive things. Kind of a perspective of rebirth. You can see the rainbow. That's a very powerful symbol of rebirth, and you can see star-filled sky and the sun and heart opening. And the other side still very negative. Start seeing colors in the world. The connection with nature, connection with the archetypal level. This is the mountain of recovery. Again, you can see she unloaded a lot of baggage there on the right side at the bottom. And now sort of reconnecting with nature in the way she experienced it in childhood. She grew up in Honolulu and she had access to, they didn't have horses, but the friends had horses. And she would do, without a saddle, and take the horse on the beach and then taking the horse into the ocean when they started to swim. So really great experiences. So that's one of the major kind of breakthroughs. Getting sense of humor back, sort of laughter. There's a lot of connecting with the feminine too. This is what she still has sometimes in the dreams. That's like a kind of like a spirit guide or something. A Hawaiian woman, and the Hawaiian women were for her like a symbol of femininity. They really own the femininity and they live it. And I think we have one more picture there. Oh, no, this is not yet what I meant. Oh, this is the end of the journey, and I think she images somewhere T.S. Eliot. I can see if I can find it. It's from the Four Quartets. She has, at the end, she has one more kabir, which is, "Are you looking for me? I am in the seat next to you. My shoulder is against yours. You will not see me in stupas, not in Indian shrines, not in synagogues, not in cathedrals, not in masses, kirtans, not if you winding your legs around your neck." This is Hatha Yoga. Or eating nothing but vegetables. When you really look for me, you will see me instantly. You will find me in the tiniest house of time. Kabir says, "Student, tell me, what is God?" God is the breath inside the breath. And then this T.S. Eliot is at the end of the paper. We shall not cease from exploration, and at the end of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. So this is what in Zen they are saying. When you start meditating, the rivers at that point are not rivers anymore, and mountains are not mountains, and when you finish it, rivers are rivers again, mountains are mountains, but you see it very differently. And it's also in the auxiliary pictures. and you return to the world. So this is the best I could in a short time. But, I'm really sorry that she's not here to do it herself. You don't always get what you want. So we have just very short time if you want to take a few questions. Very right time. Looks like that. Okay, again, many thanks for the invitation.
Just one question. One question.
Oh, where is it?
Here.
Okay, please.
These pictures, during the, you said, I don't know the English word, getting better. How was the abstinence going with this getting better? This was already the period of abstinence during these pictures of where you told us that she was getting better.
Well, yeah, she was sober. She, you know, I mentioned we couldn't break it through. We just, as long as she was drinking, we do the psychedelic session, and at the end she would go and get some way of getting some wine or something. I threw a few bottles into the canyon near the ocean, and there's just no way of stopping it. And we also, it disturbed our relationship. You know, there was no more trust, and she was not telling me the truth, or sort of hiding things and so on. It was a really difficult time, and so finally I said, Christina, I love you too much to watch you destroy yourself. If you don't stop, I'm going. And then daughter came. She stayed with us for the vacation at Esalen, and she said, Mommy, I will not come back if you're doing this. And that was like, what they call intervention. It was just, two of us, but it was enough. She decided, I really go and I get treatment. So she went for 4 weeks in a place where she couldn't drink. And then, so when she was doing this, the recovery work, she was really, it was not done when she was drinking. But some of the things were from memory, you see, from the time of drinking. Like when she said the bottom of the bottle and so on. Please.
I heard you mention meditation and yoga before a few times, and I was wondering if you could speak about your own experiences, or maybe your wife's experience, or both of your experiences with yoga and meditation and practicing these kind of things.
She was the Hatha yoga person. I went to her workshop. When we lived at Esalen, she was offering workshops, and I would go there, and she was so amazingly flexible. She'd say, "Okay, put your hands behind your back and slowly work to your wrists," and then I was still missing 4 inches. I would have to use a towel to connect those. And she would go full lotus and then go and put her forehead on the floor and so on. So there was no chance. But we both meditated quite a bit with Muktananda. We went to the intensives and spent some time in the ashram there. And again, I was mostly going into, either kind of really blissful states or into the void. And she was still having experience. I was jealous because I kind of remember my experiences from the 60s going through births and so on. I like the drama. And some of you, if you ask me what are the spiritual systems I like, I love the simplicity of Buddhism. And I also love the rich mythology of the Hindu religion. And also the Tibetans, they have very powerful, archetypes. The iconography of Tibetan Buddhism is fantastic. And I don't have a sort of commitment. In some sense, I love that all. I love the Australian Aborigines and Shinto. I mean, each religion has something to offer, and I really have strong feelings about there not being just one religion. I mean, it would be really boring if everybody is doing the same thing. Because it's like the cosmic creativity that's expressing itself in different languages, different colors, different religions. So the idea that everybody should be the same, it leads to a lot of problems. Joseph Campbell used to say, a useful deity has to be transparent for the transcendent. It's pointing to the source that's out of which all of them coming. And he says, if you make the archetypes opaque, you have idolatry. And you create a situation where you unite a certain group of people who are willing to worship in a particular way, and then you set that group against others. And it's enough for war, the Jews and the Muslims and the Christians and the Muslims, and it's almost on the verge that we would have a war between Islam and Christianity. And then even differences within the religion. You have centuries of Protestants and Catholics killing each other, and the Sunnis and the Shiites. Religion is supposed to bring things together. Religio means binding together what was connected, not separating the world more. A lot of the violence and everything that's happening in the world has some deep connection to religion. That Joseph was going, you want to worship a certain way, and there's no place for people who want to worship in a different way. So my idea for future religion of the planet is you give people some means, they can sort of experience their own spiritual journey, but you have absolutely no investment whether this is going to be shamanic or Egyptian or Christian or Buddhist. I mean, they're all really interesting sort of iconographies and interesting ways of looking at reality. There's a beautiful picture in one of the tantric books of Ajit Mukherjee, which I love. There's a yogi in the middle and a lot of squares, and each square has some symbols. And each of them represents one way of perceiving the universe. So the idea reality is so dense with meaning, so complex, that you can put a lot of various worldviews there. If you're a Newtonian physicist, you see it one way. If you are a quantum relativistic physicist, you see it a different way. If you are an astrologer, and everybody, if it's a really good system, you get enough confirmation from what's happening in the world that it confirms your belief system, and then you can move to something else, and suddenly you find out there's a different way of looking at reality. And I think that makes it interesting. It's like you really don't get answers. I mean, if you get clear answers, it would stop being fun. Yeah, it's okay. I had experiences where it seemed like the universe was like Leela, was divine play, and there was sort of the creative principle knew everything, and we were just sort of didn't understand what was happening, and the only thing that we could do was sort of our eyes opening, and it's almost like getting a point of a good joke. And then I had another session where it seemed that the creators can make mistakes, and then somehow, during creation, it just the basic parameters were set. Like when somebody discovered chess, if you make 64 squares, some of them black, some of them white, and then figures with certain possibilities of movement, it's going to be an interesting game. You can, really have a lot of fun with it. But that person who designed chess couldn't possibly foresee all the combinations, all the different games. You have to give it to really big computers, and it's still challenging. So it seemed like it was similar, like the divine principles, that certain basic principles, and then certain limits, and then sort of once it starts going, it's too complex, so that the divine cannot, cannot sort of be in charge of it. And there was an idea like that we can have some role if we clear ourselves as channels, that the divine can reach back into creation and sort of retouch it, sort of fix some of the things that got out of hand somehow, that was not meant to be that way, it's just too complex. And both of these perspectives were absolutely convincing when I was in that place. One was like when you make a kaleidoscope, you know that when you put these glasses there and a lot of color stones and you turn it, there's going to be a lot of interesting visual things, but you cannot foresee, what all the combinations that will happen. Chess is another one like that. And so the possibility that actually had one session where it seemed like there was some kind of fatal error made. You see that the development of life gets to the point where you develop technology, and then technology sort of turns itself against the biological. Well, there was a plan for self-destruction that happened. It was not meant to be, but things sort of got out of hand. So I think it's very interesting to. It always surprises when the Soviet Union fell apart, or when Gorbachev said, just put down the wall to Germany, you can unite Germany, and as far as the Czechs and the Poles and Hungarians are concerned, you can have your freedom, you're not interested. I thought you would be crazy. I mean, they never let go of anything that they got. And it happened, and then a little time later, you wake up and there's no superpower, there's no Soviet Union, nobody got killed. There was Neptune-Uranus, by the way, Neptunian revolution, the boundaries dissolved and just fell apart. And, so I hope that one day we'll wake up and there will be headlines, scientists discover a strain of bacteria that consumes plastic and releases oxygen into the atmosphere, something like that. It would be like a good, that would be good. Okay. So again, thanks very much for the invitation.
Thank you, Stella.
Thanks. Is Tina still there? Thanks so much for what you have done. I'm sure I did it. I sort of gave you a hard time. And thanks to all of you. I mean, without you, we couldn't have this evening at all. So, and I hope we see each other at some other time, another occasion. Okay.
Thank you, Stan, so much. Za konec bi samo še opozorila za tiste, ki mogoče niso dobili maila do nedeljo, bo Stan imel seminar od 10 do 4 bo predaval tukaj o smartfilmiranju, kot če je kdo zainteresiran. Ne se prosim prijav, ker če bo pač premalo prijavno, bomo odpovedali seminar. Hvala.